Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Eleanor Hawthorne, but everyone calls me Ellie. I've been a ranger here in the Great Smoky Mountains for 13 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these woods could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, bad storms, you name it, I've handled it. I started this job back in 1949, right after my brother Tommy died in the war. Mom needed someone to look after her, and I needed something to keep my hands busy and my mind off missing him. There weren't many women doing ranger work back then, but the Park Service was short on people, and I knew these mountains like the back of my hand. My beat covers the Elkmont area, especially the trail that leads up to Cataract Falls. It's a beautiful spot, a 200-foot waterfall that crashes down over limestone rocks, surrounded by thick rhododendron bushes that bloom pink and white in spring. The Cherokee used to have stories about that place, but I never paid much attention to old legends. I was always more interested in real things. Broken trail markers, injured hikers, weather warnings. The falls are about 3 miles up a winding trail from the main road. It's not an easy hike, but it's worth it when you get there. The sound of all that water falling is something special. On quiet days, you can hear it echoing through the valleys for miles around. October of 1962 started out normal enough. The leaves were turning gold and red, and we were getting those first cold mornings that make your breath fog up. I was doing my usual rounds, checking trail markers, clearing fallen branches, making sure the safety ropes at the overlooks were still solid. That's when Jim and Susan Miller came stumbling down the trail, both of them white as sheets. "Ranger," Jim called out when he saw me. "There's someone up there who needs help." I grabbed my first aid kit and radio. "What happened? Someone fall?" "A woman," Susan said, her voice shaking. "We heard her screaming for help near the falls. It sounded terrible, like she was hurt real bad. Did you see her?" They looked at each other. "No," Jim said slowly. "We called back, but she didn't answer. We tried to find her, but..." He trailed off. "But what?" The screaming stopped all of a sudden, just cut off like someone threw a switch. I followed them back up the trail, my boots crunching on the fallen leaves. The Millers stayed close behind me, jumpy at every sound. When we got to the falls, everything seemed normal. The water crashed down just like always, and the mist hung in the air, making everything smell clean and fresh. "Where did you hear the screaming?" I asked. Susan pointed toward the edge of the cliff where the water went over. "Right there." She sounded close, like she was standing right at the edge. I walked over and looked around. The ground was soft from all the mist, and I could see boot prints from other hikers. But then I saw something that made me stop cold. There were footprints in the mud, small, like a woman's feet. But they were different from regular boot prints. These looked like they were made by soft shoes, maybe moccasins. And they led right to the edge of the cliff and just stopped. I got down on my hands and knees and looked closer. The prints were clear as day, pressed deep into the soft earth. But at the very edge, where the rock dropped away into nothing, they just ended. No sign that anyone had backed up or turned around. "Did either of you walk right up to the edge?" I asked. The Millers shook their heads. "We stayed back," Jim said. "After we heard the screaming stop, we got scared and came to find you." I stood up and brushed the dirt off my knees. Something cold was creeping up my spine, but I pushed it down. There had to be a logical explanation. "Maybe someone did fall," I said. "I'll radio for a search team." But when I tried my radio, all I got was static mixed with something else, a sound like wind, or maybe someone crying very far away. I smacked the side of the radio, thinking the battery was going bad. "Hello, base. This is Ranger Hawthorne at Cataract Falls. Do you copy?" More static, and then that strange crying sound again. The Millers heard it too. I could tell by the way their faces went pale. Is that the woman?" Susan whispered. I switched the radio off. Equipment problems, I said, trying to sound calm. Happens all the time up here. Too many rocks interfering with the signal. But I'd been using that radio for 3 years, and it had never made sounds like that before. The woods around us had gone quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no buzz of insects. Even the waterfall seemed muted, like someone had turned down the volume. The only sound was our breathing and the crunch of leaves under our feet. "We should go," Jim said. "This place doesn't feel right." I couldn't argue with that. Something was wrong here, though I couldn't put my finger on what. But I was a ranger, and it was my job to figure these things out. "You folks head back to your car," I told them. "I'll file a report and get a proper search team up here tomorrow." They didn't need to be told twice. As soon as they disappeared down the trail, I was alone with the falls and that strange, heavy silence. I walked around the area one more time, looking for any sign of what might have happened. But all I found were those impossible footprints leading nowhere, and a feeling in my gut that something very old and very wrong was stirring in these mountains. 3 days later, it happened again. I was at the ranger station filling out paperwork about broken trail signs when Bob and Rita Clearwater came through the door. They had that same look the Millers had, wide eyes and pale faces, like they'd seen something that shouldn't exist. "We need to report something," Bob said. "Up at Cataract Falls." My pen stopped moving. "What kind of something?" "A robbery." "Oman calling for help," Rita said. "We heard her clear as day, screaming like she was dying." I set down my pen. "Did you see her?" "No, but we heard her. She was calling, 'Help me, please help me,' over and over." Rita's hands were shaking. "We tried to find her, but..." "But?" "The voice was coming from the waterfall itself," Bob said. "Like she was standing right in the middle of the water, falling down with it." I felt that cold feeling in my spine again. What time was this? Around 4 in the afternoon. Good daylight, clear weather. Same time of day as the Millers had heard it. I pulled out the incident report from 3 days ago and compared the details. Same location, same type of screaming, same mysterious ending when the voice just stopped. "Did you call back to her?" Rita nodded. "I yelled, 'Where are you?' and 'We're coming to help.' But then..." She looked at her husband. "Then the voice changed," Bob said quietly. "Instead of calling for help, it started calling our names, both of our names. 'Bob, Rita, come closer. Come to the water.' The hair on my arm stood up. You're sure it was your names?" "Clear as anything. But we'd never told anyone our names up there. We hadn't seen another soul on the trail." I stood up and grabbed my jacket. "I'm going up there to take a look." "Now?" Rita asked. "It's almost dark." She was right. The sun was getting low and the trails would be dangerous after dark. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I waited until morning, I'd miss something important. "You folks go on home," I said. "And thanks for reporting this." After they left, I sat there thinking about those footprints, the strange radio static, and now voices that knew people's names. None of it made sense, but I'd learned to trust my instincts over the years. And my instincts were telling me something was very wrong at Cataract Falls. I decided to call G.M. Whitfield, the senior ranger. Jim had been working these mountains for 20 years, and if anyone would know what to make of this, it would be him. "Jim, it's Ellie. I need to run. Something by you." "What's on your mind?" I told him about both incidents, the screaming woman, the footprints that led nowhere, the voices calling people's names. Jim listened without interrupting, which was his way when something was serious. "You think someone's playing pranks?" I asked when I finished. There was a long pause. "Ellie, you know the Cherokee stories about that place?" "Not really. I mean, I know they have legends about all these mountains, but I never paid much attention." "Maybe you should. There's an old woman named Mary Crow Feather who lives down in Cherokee. She knows all the old stories. Might be worth talking to her." "Jim, you don't really think..." "I think," he said carefully, "that there are things in these mountains that don't fit in our ranger manuals. I've seen enough strange stuff over the years to keep an open mind." The next morning, I drove down to Cherokee and found Mary Crowfeather's house, a small place with a garden full of herbs and a porch lined with wind chimes. She was sitting in a rocking chair, like she'd been expecting me. "You're here about the hollering woman," she said before I could introduce myself. I sat down in the chair next to her. "How did you know?" "Same way I know you've heard her voice twice now, and that there's going to be more." Mary's dark eyes studied my face. "She's been sleeping for a long time, but something's woken her up." "Who is she?" Mary was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains. "Her name was Ayana. She lived near the falls with her husband and baby daughter, maybe 200 years ago. That was before your people came to these mountains." "What happened to her?" "Smallpox came through in the winter, killed her little girl, and her husband too. Ayana couldn't accept it. She kept waiting for them to come back, kept calling their names. When spring came and she realized they were really gone, she threw herself from the falls. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. And now she's... what? A ghost?" "The Cherokee don't think about spirits the way white people do," Mary said. "Ayana never moved on. Her grief tied her to that place. She calls to people because she's still looking for her family, still hoping someone will answer. But why is she starting up again now? You said she'd been sleeping." Mary's face darkened. "Grief calls to grief. Someone's been to that place recently who carries the same kind of pain she does. Someone who's lost family, who knows what it feels like to have a piece of your heart torn away." My breath caught. She was talking about me, about Tommy, and the hole his death had left in my life. "The radio static," I said. "The voices calling people's names. She's getting stronger. More people hear her, and each time she feeds on their fear and sadness. Pretty soon she won't just be calling to people." "What do you mean?" Mary looked at me with eyes that seemed to see too much. "She'll start trying to bring them to her, to the water. Because if she can't have her family back, maybe she can make a new one." I drove back to the park with Mary's words echoing in my head. When I got to the ranger station, there was a message waiting for me. Another couple had heard the screaming woman at Cataract Falls. This time they said she'd called them by name and begged them to come into the water with her. They'd run down the trail and hadn't stopped until they reached their car. The reports kept coming in. Every few days, someone else would stumble into the ranger station with the same story. A woman's voice at Cataract Falls calling for help, then calling their names. But it was getting worse. The Peterson family heard her laughing, a sound like breaking glass that echoed off the rocks, when 12-year-old Danny Peterson got too close to the edge, trying to see where the voice was coming from. His parents said something, grabbed his jacket, and tried to pull him over. They yanked him, back just in time. Sarah Mitchell, hiking alone, said the voice had started singing a lullaby in a language she didn't recognize. When she tried to leave, she kept getting turned around on the trail, like the path was changing behind her. She didn't find her way out until after dark. And then there was what happened to the Hendersons. Carl and Dorothy Henderson were celebrating their 30th wedding anniversary with a camping trip. They'd been coming to the Smokies every year since they got married, and Cataract Falls was their special place. They never made it home. I found their car 3 days later, still parked at the trailhead. Their camping gear was in the back seat, but there was no sign of them on the trail. Jim and I organized a search party, 20 volunteers combing every inch of the area around the falls. We found Dorothy's wedding ring at the edge of the cliff, just the ring, sitting on a flat rock like someone had placed it there carefully. No other trace of either of them. The Park Service called in divers to search the pool at the bottom of the falls, but the water was too deep and the current too strong. If the Hendersons had gone over, we'd never find them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dorothy Henderson's ring, sitting there like an offering. And I kept hearing Mary Crowfeather's words. She'll start trying to bring them to her. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep and drove to the trailhead. I told myself I was just going to take another look around, maybe find some clue the search party had missed. But the truth was, I needed to face whatever was up there. The moon was almost full, bright enough to light the trail without a flashlight. The woods were dead quiet. No owls, no rustling in the bushes. Nothing. Just my footsteps on the packed earth and the distant sound of the waterfall. As I got closer to the falls, I started hearing something else. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized what it was. Someone was crying. Not the desperate screaming the hikers had reported. This was softer, sadder. The sound of someone who'd been crying for so long they didn't have any strength left. It was coming from the direction of the waterfall. I stopped at the edge of the clearing and listened. The crying went on, rising and falling like a song. There were words mixed in, but I couldn't make them out. They sounded like Cherokee, like the lullaby Sarah Mitchell had described. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" The crying stopped instantly, like I'd turned off a radio. The silence that followed was so complete it made my ears ring. Then, clear as day, I heard my own name. Eleanor. Not Ellie, like everyone called me. Eleanor, in a voice like wind through leaves. The voice was coming from the waterfall itself, like Bob Clearwater had said. Eleanor Hawthorne. My legs started shaking. Nobody used my full name except my mother, and she was 80 miles away, safe in her bed. "Eleanor, come closer." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I was a ranger, and this was my territory. If something was wrong here, it was my job to deal with it. I took a step toward the falls. "That's right, Eleanor. Come to the water." Another step. The mist from the falls was cold on my face, and I could feel something else, a presence, watching me from somewhere I couldn't see. "You know why I'm calling you, don't you, Eleanor?" I did know, though I didn't want to admit it. Mary Crow Feather had been right. This thing could sense the grief I carried, the empty space where Tommy used to be. "Your brother's here with me, Eleanor. Tommy's here, and he wants to see you." I stopped walking. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the waterfall. "He says he's been waiting for you. He says he's lonely." "Tommy's dead," I whispered. "So are Carl and Dorothy. But they're not lonely anymore. They're with their families now, with everyone they ever lost." I looked toward the falls and saw something that made my blood freeze. There was a figure standing at the edge of the cliff, just barely visible in the moonlight. A woman in a long dress, her black hair hanging down to cover her face. She raised one hand and beckoned to me. "Come, Eleanor. Come to the water, and you'll see him again. You'll see Tommy." For just a second, I almost did it. The grief I'd been carrying for 13 years rose up like a wave, and all I wanted was to see my brother's face one more time. But then I remembered something Mary Crow Feather had said. If she can't have her family back, maybe she can make a new one. This thing didn't have Tommy. It was lying, using my pain against me, just like it had used the Hendersons' love for each other. "No," I said out loud. The figure at the waterfall tilted its head like it was surprised. "No," I said again, louder. "Tommy's gone, and that's the truth. I can't bring him back, and neither can you." The temperature around me dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The figure straightened up, and for the first time, I could see its face. It wasn't human. The features were all wrong, too sharp, too pale, with eyes like black holes. When it opened its mouth, the sound that came out was like a mountain screaming. I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I drove away, I could hear that inhuman scream echoing through the valleys behind me. Back at the ranger station, I sat in my office with all the lights on and tried to figure out what to do. I couldn't file a report about what I'd seen. Who would believe it? But I couldn't let this thing keep hurting people either. I called Mary Crow Feather. "I saw her," I said when she answered. "The hollering woman. She tried to get me to jump." "But you didn't." "No. But she is not going to stop, is she? She's going to keep calling to people until someone else dies." There was a long pause. "There might be a way," Mary said finally, "but it's dangerous." "Tell me." "Ayana is trapped by her grief, but she's also sustained by it. If someone could help her let go of that pain, really let go, she might be able to move on. How? The old ways, Cherokee prayers and ceremonies. But it has to be done at the falls, where she's strongest, and it has to be done by someone who understands her pain. I knew what she was asking. Someone who's lost family. Yes. And someone brave enough to face her without running. I thought about the Hendersons and all the other people who'd been terrorized. I thought about Danny Peterson, almost pulled over the cliff. Someone had to stop this. What do I need to do? Mary was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, meet me at the falls tomorrow at sunset. And Eleanor, bring something that belonged to your brother. The next day dragged by like a week. I went through the motions of my regular patrol, but I couldn't concentrate on anything. Every radio call made me jump. Every shadow looked like a figure in a long dress. At 5 o'clock, I drove to my mother's house and went up to the attic. Tommy's things were still there in an old trunk, just like we'd left them after the funeral. His baseball glove, his high school yearbook, letters he'd sent from basic training. At the bottom of the trunk was his dog tags. I picked them up, feeling the weight of the metal in my palm. Tommy had been so proud of those tags, had worn them every day until he shipped out. I put them in my pocket and drove back to the falls. Mary was waiting for me at the trailhead, carrying a leather bag that smelled like sage and cedar. We walked up the trail together as the sun got lower in the sky. What exactly are we going to do? Asked. We're going to help her remember, Mary said. Remember what it was like before the grief consumed her. Remember the love she had for her family, instead of just the pain of losing them. And if it doesn't work? Mary didn't answer. The falls looked different in the evening light, older somehow, more primitive. The mist rising from the pool below caught the last rays of sunlight and turned them gold and red. Mary began taking things out of her bag, bundles of dried herbs, a wooden bowl, what looked like pieces of carved bone. She arranged them in a circle near the edge of the cliff. Light a fire, she said. Small one, right in the center. I gathered some dry sticks and got a fire going. Mary sprinkled something on the flames that made them burn blue and green, and the smell of cedar smoke filled the air. Then she began to sing. I couldn't understand the words, but the melody was haunting, sad and beautiful at the same time. As her voice rose and fell, I felt something changing in the air around us. The temperature dropped and the shadows grew longer. She's coming, Mary whispered. Are you ready? I pulled Tommy's dog tags out of my pocket and held them tight. Ready. The figure appeared at the edge of the waterfall just like before, but this time I didn't run. I stood my ground and looked at her. Really looked at her. Under the inhuman features, I could see what she had been once. A young mother, probably not much older than me, someone who had loved her family more than life itself. Ayana, Mary called out in Cherokee, then in English. Ayana, we know your pain. We know your loss. The figure turned toward us, and I saw something flicker in those black hole eyes. Recognition, maybe, or hope. Mary kept singing, and I found myself speaking without really meaning to. I lost my brother, I said. Tommy. He died in Korea, and I never got to say goodbye. The figure took a step closer. I've been carrying that pain for 13 years, I continued. Every day I think about what I should have said to him, what I should have done errant. I've been angry at God, angry at the war, angry at Tommy for leaving me. The features of the figure were shifting, becoming more human. But holding on to that anger, that grief, it doesn't bring him back. It just keeps me from living. I held up Tommy's dog tags, and they caught the firelight. These are his. I've kept them because I thought letting go would mean forgetting him. But that's not true, is it? I can remember the love without holding on to the pain. The figure was crying now, not the terrifying wails the hikers had described, but real tears, quiet and full of sorrow. You can remember them too, I said to her. Your husband, your little girl. You can remember how much you loved them without letting that love become a prison. Mary's singing grew louder, and the figure began to change. The sharp, inhuman features softened. The black holes became dark eyes, sad but not empty. I could see her as she had been, a young Cherokee woman, beautiful and kind, destroyed by grief. "Let them go, Ayana," Mary said. "Let them rest. Let yourself rest." The figure looked at me one more time, and I saw gratitude in her eyes. Then she smiled, a real smile full of peace, and faded away like morning mist. The temperature returned to normal. The oppressive feeling that had hung over the falls was gone. Even the waterfall sounded different, cleaner, lighter. Mary and I sat by the fire until it burned down to ashes. Neither of us spoke. There wasn't much to say. That was 5 months ago. Since then, there haven't been any more reports of screaming at Cataract Falls. The hikers who come back from there now talk about how peaceful it is, how the sound of the water seems to wash away their troubles. The Park Service never did find the Hendersons' bodies, and officially, they're still listed as missing persons. But sometimes, when I'm up at the falls doing maintenance, and I like to think they found their way to wherever people go when they're ready to let go of this world. I kept Tommy's dog tags, but I don't carry them like a burden anymore. Sometimes I take them out and remember the good times. Playing catch in the backyard, him teaching me to drive, the letters he sent from basic training that made me laugh until I cried. The grief is still there, but it's different now, softer. It doesn't control me the way it used to. Mary Crow Feather comes up to the falls sometimes just to sit and listen to the water. She says the Cherokee believe that places hold memories, both good and bad. What we did up there didn't erase the tragedy that happened 200 years ago. It just helped transform it into something that could heal instead of harm. I've started learning Cherokee history, reading the old stories. There are other places in these mountains with their own legends, their own spirits. Most of them are peaceful, but Mary says there are a few that might need help, just like Ayana did. I guess that makes me more than just a ranger now. I'm still here to protect the hikers and maintain the trails, but I'm also here to listen to the mountains themselves, to the old voices that most people never hear. The Smokies are ancient places, full of memories that go back thousands of years. There's beauty here and peace, but there's also pain that needs healing. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to face it, you can help turn that pain into something better. Something that helps instead of hurts. Something that brings peace instead of terror. The hollering woman of Cataract Falls is quiet now, but I know she's still there, watching over the place where she once lived and loved. Only now, instead of calling people to their deaths, she's helping them find their way to healing, just like she helped me find mine. My name is Vincent Coldheart, but everyone calls me Vinnie. For 19 years, I've been a park ranger in the Monongahela National Forest here in West Virginia. I've seen just about everything these mountains can throw at you. Black bears that got too friendly with campers, plane crashes in the deep woods, hunters who thought they knew better than the forest and paid for it with frostbite or worse. I'm 42 now, and I look every day of it. My ex-wife Sarah used to say I aged in dog years out here in the wilderness. She wasn't wrong. The divorce papers came through 3 years back, and now I see my kids, Tommy and Lisa, maybe twice a month if I'm lucky. They live down in Charleston with their mom and her new husband who sells insurance and probably never spent a night outside in his life. I drink too much coffee. It's a habit you pick up when you're working alone most of the time, checking on hiking trails and monitoring the wildlife. My specialty is large predators and what we call wildlife conflict resolution. That's a fancy way of saying I'm the guy they call when a bear gets into someone's garbage or when hunters report something that doesn't make sense. Blackwater Falls State Park sits right in the heart of the Allegheny Mountains. It's beautiful country, dense, old-growth forest with red spruce trees that have been standing since before my grandfather was born. There are steep ravines that drop down hundreds of feet, and old logging roads from the 1920s that wind through places where the sun barely touches the ground even in summer. The falls themselves drop 65 feet straight down, and the water runs dark as tea from all the tannins in the fallen leaves. Local folks have been telling stories about these woods for generations. They talk about something called the Grafton Monster, sightings that go back to the 1800s. I always figured it was just ears standing up on their hind legs, maybe some tall tales that got bigger with each telling. November of 1977 was colder than usual. The first heavy snow came early, and by the third week of the month, we were seeing temperatures drop into the single digits at night. The isolation out here is something city folks can't really understand. We're 15 miles from the nearest town, no cell phone towers, and when the weather turns bad, those mountain roads become death traps. I had my standard equipment, a Winchester Model 70 rifle, emergency shelter kit, Coleman lanterns, and enough supplies to last a week if I got snowed in somewhere. After 19 years, you learn to be prepared for anything. Or at least, I thought I did. It was November 22nd when I got the call on my radio. State police had found a hunter's camp about 10 miles up the old logging road near Blackwater Ridge. The hunter, a man named Dale Morrison from Ohio, was dead. The state boys wanted me to take a look because they thought it might be a bear attack. I loaded up my Jeep and headed out that morning, figuring I'd be back by afternoon with a standard incident report. Morrison was an experienced hunter, according to his hunting license. He'd been coming to these woods for 12 years running. He knew what he was doing. When I got to the campsite, I understood why the state police were confused. The camp was destroyed, not just messed up, completely torn apart. Morrison's tent looked like it had been shredded by claws the size of railroad spikes. His gear was scattered over a 100-yard area, some of it hanging in trees 15 feet off the ground. His Jeep had deep gouges in the metal, scratches that went right through the paint down to bare steel. But it was the tracks that stopped me cold. I've been tracking animals for 2 decades. I know bear prints, deer prints, wild boar, mountain lion, anything that walks, runs, or crawls through these mountains. These tracks were different. They were huge, for one thing, nearly 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. But they weren't bear tracks. Bears walk on 4 legs, and when they stand up, they don't walk very far. These tracks showed a bipedal gait, something walking upright on 2 legs with a stride length that was impossible for any animal I knew. The spacing between prints was over 4 feet apart. Whatever made them was taking steps that would require legs longer than any man alive. I spent 3 hours measuring, photographing, and taking plaster casts of those prints. The whole time I kept looking over my shoulder. The forest was too quiet. No bird sounds, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. It was like every living thing in the area had packed up and left. I filed my report that evening, but I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about those tracks and about Dale Morrison. The coroner would do his work, but I already knew what killed him. I just didn't know what to call it. The second incident happened 3 days later, about 3 miles from Morrison's camp. This time it was a local man named Carl Brennan, someone I'd known for years. Carl was a good hunter, careful and respectful of the woods. He'd grown up in these mountains just like his father and grandfather before him. When I found Carl's camp, the destruction was even worse than Morrison's. His truck had been flipped completely over, all 4 wheels in the air. Trees around the campsite were broken off 12 to 15 feet up, snapped like toothpicks. The smell hit me before I even got out of my Jeep. A musk so strong and wild it made my eyes water. Carl's body was found 50 yards from his camp, and I won't describe what that looked like. The thing that got him had claws and the strength to tear a full-grown man in half. I'd seen bear attacks before, and this wasn't that. Bears kill to defend themselves or their cubs. This was something else entirely. I called in State Trooper Mark Davidson and a local tracker, Med William Gossman. Everyone called him Goose. These were men I trusted, men who'd been in the woods as long as I had. If anyone could help me make sense of what was happening, it would be them. Goose found more tracks, leading away from Carl's campsite toward the deeper forest. The pattern was the same. Bipedal, impossibly long stride, prints that pressed deep into the frozen ground. But there was something else. The tracks showed intelligence. They avoided open areas where they might be seen, stuck to heavy cover, and changed direction several times as if the creature knew it was being followed. "Vinnie," Goose said, kneeling beside one of the clearer prints. I've been tracking in these mountains for 30 years. My daddy taught me, and his daddy taught him. I ain't never seen nothing like this. Mark Davidson was examining the overturned truck. Whatever did this had to weigh at least 800 pounds, he said. And look at these claw marks. They go right through the steel. That night, we set up our own camp about a mile from the incident site. We had rifles, flashlights, and a radio to call for backup if needed. We figured we were dealing with some kind of large predator, maybe a bear with unusual behavior, or something that had wandered down from Canada. Around midnight, we heard it for the first time. The sound started as a low rumble, almost like distant thunder. Then it rose into a roar that echoed off the ridges and ravines around us. It was loud enough to hurt your ears, and it went on for what felt like forever. Every animal sound in the forest stopped dead when that roar started. Jesus Christ, Mark whispered. What the hell was that? We sat in our tent with our rifles ready, listening to that terrible sound bounce back and forth between the mountains. When it finally stopped, the silence was even worse. We could hear our own heartbeats. Year later, we heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps crunching through the snow, coming toward our camp. The steps were spaced far apart, just like the tracks we'd been following. Whatever was making them was big, and it was walking upright. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and unzipped the tent flap. Mark and Goose were right behind me. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping back and forth across the trees. That's when I saw the eyes. 2 red points of light reflecting back at us from about 50 yards away. They were at least 8 feet off the ground, too high to be a bear or any other animal I knew. As my light hit them, they didn't blink or look away like a normal animal would. They stared right back at us with what I can only describe as intelligence. Then they were gone. The footsteps moved away, crashing through the underbrush. We followed the sound until it faded into the distance, but we never saw those eyes again that night. In the morning, we found tracks all around our campsite. The thing had circled us for hours while we slept, staying just outside the range of our flashlights. The prints were clear in the snow, 18 inches long, 8 inches wide, with what looked like claw marks at the end of each toe. It was studying us, Goose said, his voice quiet, looking for weaknesses. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with just an animal. This thing could think, could plan, and for some reason, it had decided we were enemies. Word spread fast in a small community like ours. 2 hunters dead in less than a week, both killed by something nobody could identify. The state wildlife office sent down a team from Charleston, but they packed up and left after one look at the evidence. They filed a report that blamed the deaths on a large, unidentified predator and recommended closing the area to hunting. But hunting season was in full swing, and there were dozens of hunters already in the mountains. Most of them laughed off the warnings. These were men who'd been hunting these woods their whole lives. They weren't about to be scared off by talk of monsters. I tried to convince them. I showed them the photographs, the plaster casts of the tracks, the damage to the vehicles. Some listened and packed up their camps. Others just shook their heads and checked their rifles. "Vinnie," said one old-timer named Pete Russell, "I've been hunting these mountains since before you were born. Ain't no animal alive I can't handle with my .30-06. Pete Russell was found dead 2 days later. This time I was first on the scene. Pete's camp was set up in a clearing about half a mile from Blackwater Falls. When I arrived, I could hear the water crashing down over the rocks, but there was another sound underneath it, a low growling that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Pete's truck was intact, but his camper trailer had been torn apart from the inside. The aluminum walls were shredded, and there were claw marks gouged deep into the frame. Pete himself was, well, let's just say the thing that killed him was angry about something. But this time was different. This time, I saw it. I was taking photographs of the scene when I heard a branch break behind me. I spun around with my camera still in my hands, and there it was, maybe 30 yards away at the edge of the clearing. 9 feet tall, covered in white-gray fur that looked thick enough to stop a bullet. Its arms hung down past its knees, and its hands ended in claws that looked like black daggers. But it was the face that I'll never forget. Almost human. but with red eyes that burned with intelligence and rage. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I could smell that wild musk, so strong it made my stomach turn. The creature's chest rose and fell with deep, steady breaths, and I could see its lips pulled back in what might have been a snarl. Then it was gone. 1 second it was standing here. The next it had melted back into the forest without a sound. I radioed for Mark and Goose immediately. When they arrived, we found tracks leading away from the clearing, but also something else. Drops of blood in the snow. Fresh blood, still bright red. "One of us hit it," Mark said. "Either Pete got a shot off or what?" I asked. "Or it's hurt from something else, something that happened before it came here." We followed the blood trail for 2 miles through increasingly rough terrain. The creature's tracks showed no sign of weakness or injury. If anything, its stride seemed to be getting longer, like it was moving faster. But the blood kept appearing, small drops every 20 or 30 feet. The trail led us to an area I'd never seen before, deep in the old-growth forest where the trees grew so thick that snow barely reached the ground. There were caves here, hidden among the rocks and roots. And there was something else. Bones. Lots of them. They were arranged in patterns around the cave entrances. Deer bones, bear bones, and some that looked suspiciously human. Old bones, some of them, weathered white by years of exposure, but some were fresh, with scraps of meat still clinging to them. "Jesus, Vinnie," Goose whispered. "How long has this thing been living up here?" That's when we heard the roar again, much closer this time. It came from inside one of the caves, a sound so loud and full of rage that rocks fell from the ceiling. We grabbed our rifles and backed away, but not before I saw something that made my blood freeze. Smaller tracks. Much smaller, like the big ones, but maybe half the size. There wasn't just one of these things. There was a family. As we retreated down the mountain, I kept looking back over my shoulder. I had the feeling we were being watched, being followed. The forest felt alive with hostile eyes. That night, back at the ranger station, I got a call from the state wildlife office. They were closing Blackwater Falls State Park to all hunting and camping, effective immediately. Too many people were dead, and they couldn't risk any more casualties. But I knew it wouldn't matter. The thing wasn't going to stay in its cave. It was hunting now, and it had developed a taste for human prey. Closing the park might keep some people safe, but it wouldn't stop the killing. As I hung up the phone, I heard a sound outside, the crunch of heavy footsteps in the snow. I grabbed my rifle and stepped onto the porch of the station. The footsteps circled the building once, twice, 3 times. Whatever was out there was big enough that I could feel the ground shake with each step. But when I shined my flashlight into the darkness, I saw nothing. In the morning, I found tracks all around the station. The creature had been watching me all night, maybe deciding whether I was worth the trouble. I had the feeling I was about to find out. The attack came during the worst blizzard in 20 years. I was holed up in an abandoned logging cabin about 5 miles from the ranger station, checking on some equipment that had been stored there since the 1940s. The snow was coming down so hard I couldn't see 10 feet in any direction, and the wind was howling through the trees like something alive and angry. I'd planned to wait out the storm and hike back to the station in the morning. The cabin was solid. Thick log walls, a stone fireplace, and enough supplies to last a week if needed. I felt safe there, or as safe as anyone could feel with that thing stalking through the mountains. Around 10 o'clock that night, I heard the first impact against the wall. The whole cabin shook. Dust fell from the rafters, and one of the windows cracked. I grabbed my rifle and tried to see outside, but the storm made it impossible. All I could make out were swirling clouds of snow lit by my Coleman lantern. Then came another impact, this one against the door. The heavy oak boards groaned under the pressure, and I heard the panseros, a sound of claws scraping against wood, long, deep scratches that went right through the finish down to bare timber. I knew what was out there. The creature had followed me through the storm, tracked me to this cabin in the middle of nowhere, and now it was trying to get in. The attacks came from all sides, against the door, the walls, even the roof. Each impact shook the entire structure. I could hear timbers creaking and splitting under the assault. Whatever was out there was methodically testing every weak point, looking for a way inside. Between the crashes, I could hear it moving around the cabin. The footsteps were heavy enough to make the floor vibrate, and they moved with purpose. This wasn't random violence. It was intelligent, calculated. The creature was hunting me, and it had all night to break down my defenses. I tried to radio for help, but the storm was interfering with the signal. All I got was static and the occasional broken word. I was alone, trapped in a cabin that was slowly being torn apart by something that shouldn't exist. Around midnight, the attacks stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise had been. I sat in the center of the cabin with my rifle ready, listening to the wind and trying to figure out what the creature was planning. Had it given up? Was it waiting for me to make a mistake? That's when I smelled smoke. It was coming from the fireplace, but not the normal wood smoke from my fire. This was different. Thicker, more acrid, like something was burning that shouldn't be. I looked up at the chimney and realized what was happening. The creature was trying to smoke me out. It had somehow blocked the flue, causing smoke to back up into the cabin. In a few minutes, the place would be full of toxic fumes. I had two choices: stay inside and suffocate, or go outside and face whatever was waiting for me. I chose to fight. I kicked open the door and stepped out into the blizzard with my rifle ready. The creature was standing maybe 20 feet away, a massive shadow against the swirling snow. Its red eyes reflected the light from my lantern, and I could see its chest rising and falling with deep, angry breaths. We stared at each other for a moment that felt like eternity. Then it charged. I got off 3 shots before it reached me. All 3 hit center mass, and I saw the bullets tear through its fur and into its body. But it didn't slow down. If anything, the wounds seemed to make it angrier. It hit me like a freight train, sending me flying back against the cabin wall. My rifle went spinning away into the snow, and I felt ribs crack from the impact. The creature stood over me, its claws raised to finish the job. That's when I saw something that changed everything. Behind the creature, barely visible through the storm, were 2 smaller shapes. Juveniles, maybe half the size of the adult. They hung back at the edge of the clearing, watching their parent defend them. This wasn't a monster. It was a mother protecting her children. I thought about my own kids, Tommy and Lisa, safe in Charleston with their mother. How far would I go to protect them? What would I be willing to do if something threatened them? The creature's claws came down, but I rolled aside at the last second. I scrambled through the snow toward where my rifle had fallen, the beast right behind me. Its breath was hot on my neck, and I could feel claws raking across my back as I dove for the weapon. My hand closed around the rifle stock, but when I turned to fire, the creature was already on top of me. Its weight pinned me to the ground, and those massive claws wrapped around my throat. That's when I remembered the emergency flare gun in my jacket pocket. With the last of my strength, I pulled out the flare gun and jammed it against the creature's chest. But this wasn't a normal flare. Earlier that day, I'd loaded it with rock salt that had been blessed by Preacher Williams down in Beckley. Call it superstition, call it desperation. But something told me normal weapons wouldn't stop this thing. I pulled the trigger. The blessed salt exploded across the creature's chest in a shower of red sparks. For the first time, it screamed. Not a roar, but a sound of genuine pain and surprise. It stumbled backward, clawing at the burning salt embedded in its fur. I struggled to my feet and fired the Winchester 3 more times. This time, the bullets seemed to have an effect. The creature staggered, dark blood spreading across its white-gray fur. But even wounded, it didn't retreat. Instead, it looked at me with something that might have been respect. Or maybe recognition. We were both parents, both trying to protect what mattered most to us. Then it made a sound, a low, rumbling call that echoed through the forest. The 2 juveniles appeared at its side, and together they melted back into the storm. I collapsed in the snow, my body racked with pain and exhaustion. The blizzard continued to rage around me, but I was alive. Somehow, impossibly, I was alive. I barely made it back to the ranger station the next morning. The storm had passed, but I was suffering from severe hypothermia and blood loss from the claw marks on my back. Mark Davidson found me half frozen on my front porch and rushed me to the hospital in Beckley. I spent 3 days there, telling the doctors I'd been attacked by a bear. They didn't question it. The wounds were consistent with a large predator, and bear attacks weren't uncommon in the mountains. Only Mark and Goose knew the truth, and they kept quiet. The official report listed the recent deaths as attacks by an unidentified large predator. The state closed Blackwater Falls State Park indefinitely, citing dangerous wildlife in the area. Hunting season was canceled for the rest of the year, and warning signs were posted on all the access roads. But I knew the real reason for the attacks. The creature, I still didn't know what to call it, had been protecting its territory and its young. Human activity had increased in recent years, with more hunters and campers pushing deeper into the wilderness. We'd gotten too close to something that should have been left alone. In the weeks that followed, I made some changes in my life. I stopped drinking so much coffee, started eating better, and most importantly, I called my kids. Tommy and Lisa were surprised to hear from me, but they were happy too. We started talking regularly, and I even drove down to Charleston to visit them a few times. Sarah noticed the change in me. "You seem different, Vinnie," she said during one of my visits. More present. I couldn't tell her about that night in the cabin, about staring death in the face and realizing what was truly important. But she was right. I was different. Surviving something like that changes you, makes you appreciate the time you have with the people you love. The sightings continued, but they were different now. Hikers would report glimpses of something large moving through the trees, always at a distance. Campers would find massive footprints near their sites, but only after they'd packed up and left. It was like the creature was still watching, still protecting its territory, but avoiding direct contact with humans. I kept working as a ranger, but I changed my patrol routes to stay away from the deep forest areas where I knew the creature lived. There was an understanding between us now. I wouldn't invade its territory, and it wouldn't hunt in mine. Some nights, when the wind is blowing through the mountains and the temperature drops below freezing, I can hear that roar echoing off the ridges. It's distant now, not threatening, almost like a reminder that there are still wild places in this world, places where ancient things live according to their own rules. I never filed a report about what really happened in that cabin. The official record will always say it was a bear attack, but I keep a loaded flare gun in my desk drawer, just in case. And sometimes when new rangers ask me about the legends of Blackwater Ridge, I tell them to respect the mountains and everything that lives in them. Because deep in the Monongahela National Forest, in places where the old-growth trees block out the sun and the silence is so complete you can hear your own heartbeat, something walks on two legs through the shadows. Something that has been there longer than any of us. Something that asks only to be left alone with its family. I've learned to live with that knowledge, and somehow, I think it's made me a better man. The beast of Blackwater Ridge is still out there, and as long as we respect its home, maybe that's exactly where it should stay. My name is Catherine Thornfield, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a park ranger here in Jefferson National Forest for 8 years now, and let me tell you, I thought I'd seen everything these Virginia mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, broken bones, even a few folks who got a little too friendly with the local moonshine. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened at Devil's Backbone in the summer of 1969. I was 28 then, fresh married to my high school sweetheart Tom, and still full of that bright energy that made me want to help every kid who walked through these woods. Before I became a ranger, I taught 3rd grade for 3 years. Maybe that's why they always gave me the youth groups. Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, church camps, you name it. I had all the right papers too. Wilderness safety instructor, certified youth counselor, first aid, the works. In 8 years, I'd taken 73 different groups into these mountains and never lost so much as a skinned knee that wasn't properly bandaged. The Devil's Backbone Ridge sits about 6 miles up from the main road, right where the Blue Ridge Parkway curves through some of the prettiest and most dangerous country you ever did see. The ridge got its name from the way the rocks jut up like the spine of some buried giant, all sharp edges and dark shadows. Limestone caves pock the whole area, some shallow, some deep enough that we'd never found the back of them. Local folks said Confederate soldiers hid up there during the war, and that sometimes you could still hear children crying in the caves, kids who got separated from their families when the fighting got bad. I never put much stock in ghost stories. When parents came to me worried about feral children living wild in the mountains, I'd pat their hands and explain that these were just runaways, kids with problems at home who too thought the woods looked safer than their own bedrooms. Give them a few days of being cold and hungry, and they'd come stumbling back to civilization quick enough. That was before I met the children of Devil's Backbone. It started the first week of June. The weather had been strange all spring, colder than it should be, with thick fogs rolling in every morning like clockwork. I was leading a group of 12 Boy Scouts, ages 10 to 14, good kids from Richmond who'd earned this camping trip by selling more popcorn than any troop in their district. We'd set up camp in the usual spot, a cleared area about a quarter-mile from the main ridge, close enough for good views but far enough from the caves to keep curious boys from wandering off. The first night passed normal enough. We roasted hot dogs, told stories, and I made sure everyone knew the rules. Stay within shouting distance, buddy system after dark, and absolutely no exploring the caves without me. Standard stuff I'd repeated dozens of times before. But Tommy Chen, one of the older boys, came to me right after breakfast with worry written all over his face. "Miss Kate," he said, "something was watching us last night." "What kind of something, Tommy? A raccoon? Maybe a deer?" He shook his head hard. "Kids. I saw kids standing at the edge of camp, just standing there looking at us. When I blinked, they were gone. I figured it was just nerves. First night camping can make anyone jumpy. But then 3 more boys came forward with the same story. Kids in the shadows, kids who shouldn't be there. And every single boy said the same thing. When they tried to wake their tent partner to show them, the children had vanished like morning mist. That afternoon, I hiked up to the ridge alone to take a look around. The caves were empty, like always. No signs of anyone living rough. No fire rings, no food scraps, no makeshift shelters. But something felt wrong. The woods were too quiet. In 8 years of walking these trails, I'd never heard such silence. No birds, no squirrels chattering, no bugs humming. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Standing there in that unnatural quiet, I felt eyes on my back. I turned around fast, hand going to the whistle hanging from my neck, but saw nothing except trees and shadows. Still, the feeling stayed with me all the way back to camp. That night, I heard them myself. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of children singing. The melody was sweet and soft, like a lullaby your grandmother might hum while rocking you to sleep. But there was something underneath it that made my skin crawl. A harmony that seemed to come from too many voices, all perfectly in tune. I lay in my sleeping bag for a long moment, telling myself it was just the wind through the caves making odd noises. Then I heard Tommy Chen whisper from the tent next to mine, "Miss Kate, do you hear that?" I unzipped my tent as quietly as I could and stepped outside. The singing was clearer now, coming from the direction of the ridge. In the pale moonlight, I could see shapes moving between the trees. Small shapes, child-sized, drifting like they were floating instead of walking. "Everyone stay in your tents," I called softly but firmly. "Do not come out until I say so." I grabbed my flashlight and started toward the tree line. The singing stopped the moment my light beam cut through the darkness, but I could still feel them watching, waiting. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there? Are you lost?" Silence. Then from somewhere much closer than I expected, a child's voice answered, "We're not lost. Are you?" I spun around, flashlight dancing wildly, but caught only empty air. My heart was hammering now, and my mouth had gone dry as dust. "Where are you?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Come out where I can see you. I'm a park ranger. I can help you." Laughter bubbled up from the darkness, not mean or scary, just wrong. Like hearing a recording played at the wrong speed. "We don't need help," came another voice, this one from my left. "But we're lonely. Won't you come play with us?" And that's when I saw them. They stepped out from behind the trees all at once, like they'd been waiting for some invisible signal. 6 children, maybe 7. It was hard to count because they kept moving, shifting positions in that strange flowing way that made my eyes hurt to follow. The youngest looked about 6, the oldest maybe 12 or 13. They wore clothes from different times. One little girl in a faded dress that might have been from the 1940s, a boy in overalls that looked even older, another in what could have been a Boy Scout uniform from decades past. But it was their faces that stopped my breath cold. Their skin was pale as moonlight, so white it almost seemed to glow. And their eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, the whole eye, from corner to corner, like looking into deep water at night. "Won't you come play?" the little girl in the old dress asked again, tilting her head in a way that was almost normal, almost sweet, except for those awful black eyes. I took a step backward, my hand finding the Iron Ranger badge pinned to my uniform shirt. The metal felt warm against my palm, which was strange because the night air was cold enough to make me shiver. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "We're the children," said the boy in overalls, as if that explained everything. "We've been waiting so long for new friends." "Waiting where? Do you live around here?" They all smiled at once, showing teeth that were too white, too sharp. "We live everywhere," they said in unison, their voices blending into that horrible harmony again. "In the caves, in the rocks, in the spaces between heartbeats." Behind me, I heard tent zippers opening despite my orders. The Boy Scouts were getting curious, drawn by voices their own. Gee, this was about to go very bad, very fast. "Boys, get back in your tents now," I ordered, not taking my eyes off the pale children. "Radio for help if you can reach anyone." But when I glanced over my shoulder, I saw Tommy Chen and 2 other boys walking toward us like they were in a trance, their faces blank and dreamy. "That's right," whispered the girl in the old dress. "Come play with us. We know such wonderful games." I stepped between the Boy Scouts and the pale children, spreading my arms wide. The iron badge seemed to grow warmer against my chest. "Get back," I shouted. "Whatever you are, leave these boys alone." The black-eyed children tilted their heads all at the same time, like a flock of curious birds. The boy in the scout uniform, I could see now that his patches were wrong, designs I didn't recognize from any era I knew, stepped forward. "You're different," he said, those terrible eyes fixed on my face. "You taste like iron and prayers. But don't worry, we'll fix that." They started moving toward us again, and I heard that singing rise up from the woods all around us. More voices now, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The Boy Scouts behind me took another step forward, and I realized with growing horror that I was about to lose them all. That's when my whistle saved us. Without thinking, I put it to my lips and blew as hard as I could. The sharp, piercing note cut through the supernatural harmony like a knife. The pale children stumbled backward, hands flying to their ears, and the Boy Scouts behind me blinked like they were waking up from a deep sleep. "Run!" I yelled. "Back to camp! Pack everything! We're leaving right now!" We were packed and hiking down the trail in 15 minutes flat, using flashlights to navigate in the dark. The boys were scared but trying to be brave, the way kids do when they don't want adults to see how frightened they really are. I kept them moving fast, checking over my shoulder every few steps. The singing followed us for the first mile. I got the boys back to the ranger station before dawn and called their parents to come pick them up early. Told everyone there'd been a safety concern in the camping area. The boys backed up my story without me having to ask. Whatever they'd seen out there, they knew it wasn't something they wanted to face again. But I couldn't let it go. 2 days later, I drove back to Devil's Backbone with Sheriff Tom Bridgewater, a good man I'd worked with on lost hiker cases. I also brought Dr. Ann Mills, a child psychologist from Charlottesville who specialized in trauma cases. If there really were kids living wild up there, they'd need professional help. "Kate, I've known you for 5 years," Sheriff Bridgewater said as we hiked up the trail. "You're the most sensible person I've ever met. If you say there's something wrong up here, I believe you. But kids with black eyes who sing in harmony? That sounds like... Like what?" Like I'm crazy? Like you were dealing with some very disturbed children who've been living rough for too long. Dr. Mills interrupted gently. Malnutrition can cause unusual eye discoloration. Group psychology can explain the synchronized behavior, and children in survival situations often develop pack-like instincts. I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe there was a rational explanation for what I'd seen. We found the first piece of evidence about noon. It was a child's dress, hanging from a tree branch 30 feet off the ground. The fabric was faded and worn, but I recognized it. The same style the little girl had been wearing. There was no way a normal kid could have climbed that high, and no way the wind could have blown something so heavy up there. Could be a bird's nest, Sheriff Bridgewater said, but his voice was uncertain. What kind of bird builds nests with children's clothing? I asked. We found more items as we searched the ridge. A boy's shoe balanced on top of a rock pillar that woot. It'll take climbing gear to reach. A wooden toy horse sitting in the mouth of a cave like someone had just set it down and walked away. And everywhere small handprints pressed into the limestone, some so high up on the cave walls that you'd need a ladder to make them. Dr. Mills examined the handprints with growing confusion. These are definitely from children, she said, but the size variations are inconsistent with any kind of normal growth pattern. And some of these prints, they look like they were made decades ago, but others are clearly fresh. That evening, we made camp in the same spot I'd used with the Boy Scouts. I figured if these were just troubled children, showing up with a doctor and a sheriff might convince them to come forward for help. I was wrong. They came at sunset, emerging from the caves and shadows like they'd been poured from the rock itself. More of them this time. I counted at least 15, maybe 20. Different ages, different time periods of clothing, but all with that same pale skin and those horrible black eyes. Sheriff Bridgewater went for his gun, but his hand froze halfway to his holster. Dr. Mills stood perfectly still, her notebook falling from nerveless fingers. "Hello, Kate," said the little girl in the faded dress, the one I'd seen before. "You came back. We knew you would." "We've been waiting," added the boy in overalls. "We have so much to show you." They started moving toward us in that flowing, coordinated way, and I felt that same strange pull I'd noticed with the Boy Scouts. My feet wanted to step forward. My mind wanted to follow wherever they led, but the iron badge on my chest grew warm again, and the feeling broke. "What do you want?" I asked. "To play," they answered in unison. "To have friends. To never be alone again." The boy in the old scout uniform stepped closer. In the fading light, I could see that his patches weren't just from a different era. They were from troops that had never existed, designs that hurt to look at directly. "We've been collecting friends for a very long time," he said. "Children who got lost in these mountains. Children who ran away from home. Children whose families couldn't keep them safe. Collecting them how?" He smiled, showing those too white, too sharp teeth. "We invite them to stay, to join our games, to become part of our family." "And if they don't want to stay?" The smile widened. "Everyone wants to stay eventually. The mountain spirit that watches over us makes sure of that." Dr. Mills suddenly found her voice. "You're describing kidnapping, child abduction. We need to get these children proper medical attention and—" She stopped talking because the pale children had started laughing. Not cruel laughter, not angry, just delighted, like she'd told the funniest joke they'd ever heard. "We're not the ones who were taken," the little girl said. "We're the ones who take." That's when I understood. These weren't victims. They were predators. And they'd been hunting in these mountains for longer than anyone alive could remember. Sheriff Bridgewater finally managed to draw his gun, but his hands were shaking so bad he could barely hold it steady. "Everyone stay back. Kate, Dr. Mills, get behind me." The pale children looked at the weapon with mild curiosity, like he was holding an interesting rock. "Iron bullets?" asked the boy in overalls. "Just regular bullets," Sheriff Bridgewater admitted. "Oh," they said sadly, "those won't work at all." And then they rushed us. They moved faster than anything human had a right to move, covering the distance between us in the blink of an eye. But they didn't attack like I expected. Instead, they surrounded us in a perfect circle, holding hands and singing that awful lullaby. The world started to fade around the edges. Sheriff Bridgewater's gun hand dropped to his side, and he stared at the pale children with a dreamy expression. Dr. Mills swayed on her feet, humming along with their melody. I felt the pull too, stronger than before, like invisible hands were trying to drag me forward. But that iron badge on my chest was burning now, hot enough that I could smell, my uniform shirt starting to singe. The pain kept me focused, kept me fighting against whatever spell they were weaving. "Stop," I gasped, pressing my hand against the badge. "Whatever you're doing, stop it right now." The singing faltered for just a moment, and in that brief silence, I heard something else. Screaming. Distant, echoing, coming from deep inside the caves. The voices of dozens of children calling for help that would never come. "Those are your friends?" I asked, horror making my voice crack. "The children you've been collecting?" The little girl in the faded dress looked genuinely confused. "They're not suffering," she said. "They're playing our games, forever and ever, just like we promised. Listen to them. They're screaming. They're singing," the boy in overalls corrected patiently. "Just like we taught them." The mountain spirit loves children's voices. It keeps us safe, keeps us young, keeps us together. The screaming from the caves grew louder, and I realized it wasn't just fear I was hearing. It was rage, desperation, children who had been trapped for God knows how long and were still fighting to get free. "How long?" I whispered. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since the war," said the boy in the scout uniform. "The first war, when so many children were left alone. The mountain spirit was lonely too, so it made us a deal. We help it collect new friends, and it makes sure we never have to be afraid or hungry or cold again." "The Civil War. You've been taking children since the 1860s? They nodded happily, like I'd just complimented them on a job well done. The iron badge was so hot now it was burning through my shirt, but I didn't dare let go. It was the only thing keeping me free of their influence. Sheriff Bridgewater and Dr. Mills were starting to walk toward the circle of pale children, their faces blank and peaceful. "You can join us too," the little girl offered kindly. "The spirit likes adults sometimes, especially ones who take care of children. You'd make a wonderful addition to our family." "No," I said firmly, taking a step backward. "And I'm taking my friends with me." The pale children tilted their heads in that disturbing, synchronized way. "I don't think you understand," said the boy in overalls. "This isn't a choice anymore. You came back. You brought friends. The spirit is hungry." The ground beneath our feet started to vibrate, and I heard something moving deep underground, something massive, ancient, and very much alive. The trees around the clearing began to lean inward, their branches reaching down like grasping fingers. Sheriff Bridgewater and Dr. Mills were almost to the circle now. In a few more seconds, they'd be close enough for the pale children to touch them, and I had a feeling that once that happened, they'd be lost forever. I did the only thing I could think of. I ripped the iron badge from my chest, ignoring the pain as it took fabric and skin with it, and threw it as hard as I could at the nearest pale child. The moment the iron touched him, he screamed, not with a child's voice, but with something much older and infinitely more terrible. The sound broke their circle, shattered their harmony, and sent them staggering backward like they'd been hit by lightning. Sheriff Bridgewater and Dr. Mills blinked, confusion replacing the dreamy peace on their faces. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing them both by the arms. "Run now, and don't look back." We crashed through the underbrush like demons were chasing us, which, I suppose, they were. Behind us, I could hear the pale children regrouping, their voices rising in a harmony that made the trees shake and the ground split. But they weren't following. Something about the iron, or maybe the fact that their spell had been broken, was keeping them at bay. We made it to the vehicles just as full darkness fell. I was bleeding from a dozen scratches. My chest was burned where the badge had been, and my hands were shaking, so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. "Kate!" Sheriff Bridgewater said as we drove away. "What the hell just happened up there?" I looked in the rearview mirror. The pale children were standing at the edge of the tree line, watching us go. Even from a distance, I could see those terrible black eyes reflecting our taillights. "Something that's been happening for over 100 years," I said, "and something that's going to keep happening until someone figures out how to stop it." The official report listed the incident as investigation of suspected vagrant children with no evidence of permanent habitation found. Sheriff Bridgewater backed up my recommendation to temporarily close the Devil's Backbone area for archaeological survey, which bought us some time but didn't solve the real problem. Dr. Mills left Virginia 2 weeks later, taking a position at a hospital in California. Before she went, she pulled me aside and said something I'll never forget. "Kate, I've worked with traumatized children for 15 years. I know what abuse and neglect can do to young minds, but what we saw up there, that wasn't trauma. That was something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist." She was right, and that's what scared me most. I started researching missing children cases throughout the Blue Ridge Mountains, going back as far as the records would allow. What I found kept me awake for weeks. Since 1862, at least 127 children had vanished in the National Forest area around Devil's Backbone. Some were runaways, some got lost on family camping trips, some just disappeared from their own backyards in towns at the base of the mountains. None of them were ever found. I also dug into the local folklore, interviewing elderly residents who remembered stories their grandparents had told. Same tale, over and over. Children who played in the woods and never came home. Seb's parents who heard singing from the caves and went to investigate, only to find their own kids standing among a group of pale strangers, begging to stay and play forever. The mountain spirit was real. The pale children were real. And they were still hunting. I left the ranger service 3 months after the Devil's Backbone incident. Couldn't stand the thought of leading more children into those woods, knowing what was waiting for them. Tom and I moved to Richmond, where I started working with missing children organizations, helping families navigate the system when their kids disappeared. But I kept watching the missing persons reports from the National Forest area, and I kept seeing the pattern. Every few years, another child would vanish from Devil's Backbone or the surrounding trails. Always during camping trips. Always kids who wandered away from their groups after dark. The official explanations were always the same. Bear attack, fall into hidden ravine, lost in the wilderness. Bodies never recovered due to difficult terrain. I knew better. Last month, I got a call from a new ranger working my old territory. Young woman, enthusiastic about youth programs, reminded me of myself at that age. She'd heard some stories about strange incidents at Devil's Backbone and wanted to ask my advice. "The local kids keep talking about ghost children in the caves," she told me. "Probably just campfire stories, but I want to be prepared if any of my groups report seeing things." "You worked that area for years. Ever run into anything like that?" I thought about lying. Thought about telling her it was all just folklore and overactive imaginations. Thought about protecting her the way I couldn't protect all those missing children. Instead, I told her the truth, all of it. She thanked me politely and hung up. I could hear in her voice that she thought I was just another old ranger, with too many ghost stories and not enough sense. 2 weeks later, she called back. Her voice was different this time. Shaky, frightened, but trying to sound professional. "Mrs. Thornfield," she said, "I think I need to hear that story again, and I think I need to know everything you remember about iron. The pale children are still out there, still hunting, still collecting friends for their ancient master in the mountain. And somewhere deep in those limestone caves, 127 missing children are still singing their terrible lullabies, waiting for someone brave enough and smart enough to figure out how to set them free. I'm 62 now, too old for hiking and too scared for going back, but I keep hoping that someday someone will finish what we started at Devil's Backbone. Before it's too late for the next group of children who just want to play in the woods." My name is Robert Stormcrow, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a park ranger on Grandfather Mountain for 16 years now, and in all that time, I thought I knew every trick these peaks could play on a person. Wind that could knock you flat, ice that formed faster than you could blink, weather that changed from sunny to deadly in 10 minutes flat. I was wrong about knowing everything. But let me back up a bit. Grandfather Mountain sits in the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, rising up 5,946 feet into the sky. It's famous for its wild weather and harder climbs. The Cherokee called it sacred, and after what happened to me, I understand why. I'm 39 years old, been doing mountain rescue work since I was 23. Lost my wife Sarah in a climbing accident 8 years ago. She fell when her rope snapped during what should have been an easy climb. I was supposed to be with her that day, but I got called away for an emergency rescue. Been carrying that guilt around like a stone in my chest ever since. Maybe that's why I throw myself into the work so hard. 312 successful rescues in 16 years. I know every trail, every cliff face, every place where the wind likes to play tricks. Got my weather observer certificate from NOAA, maintain all the monitoring equipment up here. The Weather Service depends on my reports. My station sits at 4,200 feet, right where the radio signals start getting spotty. Above that, you're pretty much on your own unless a helicopter can reach you. And with Grandfather Mountains famous for sudden storms, helicopter rescues get dicey fast. The mountain has always been dangerous. People die up here every year, usually from falls or exposure. But the deaths follow patterns, weather patterns, equipment failures, human error. Things you can explain with science and common sense. At least, that's what I use. D, to believe. It was late September 1985 when everything changed. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the mountainside in reds and golds. Temperature was holding steady around 70 degrees. Perfect hiking weather. I was doing my morning equipment check when the call came in. "Bobby, we got a situation on Rough Ridge," the voice crackled through my radio. It was Jim Martinez from base camp. "Hiker found something strange up there. Says there's a body, but..." His voice trailed off. "But what, Jim?" "But it's frozen solid, in 70-degree weather." I grabbed my pack and headed up the trail. Rough Ridge is a popular spot about a mile above my station. Rocky outcrop with great views, usually packed with day hikers. Not the kind of place where people die quietly. The hiker who found the body was a guy named Dave Chen, experienced climber from Asheville. He was sitting on a boulder when I reached him, looking pale and shaky. "It's over there," he said, pointing to a cluster of rocks about 50 yards away. I've never seen anything like it. Neither had I. The body belonged to Marcus Webb, a 28-year-old climber from Charlotte. I'd met him before. He was experienced, careful, had good equipment. He was sitting upright against a rock face, arms wrapped around his knees like he was trying to keep warm, but he was frozen solid. Ice crystals covered his beard and eyebrows. His water bottle had burst from freezing. The metal on his gear was so cold it burned my fingers when I touched it. The weird part? Everything around him was normal temperature. The rocks, the ground, even the air. Just Marcus and a small circle maybe 6 feet around him were winter cold. I checked my thermometer. 68 degrees. Checked my weather radio. No reports of unusual conditions. Clear skies, light wind, normal September day. I called it in, and within 2 hours we had. But a team up there. Paramedics, sheriff's deputies, even a guy from the medical examiner's office. Nobody could explain what they were seeing. "Heart attack, maybe?" suggested one of the paramedics. "Sometimes the body temperature drops fast after death." But that didn't explain the ice, or why my breath started misting when I got within 10 feet of Marcus's body. Dr. Susan Creek showed up around noon. She's a meteorologist with NOAA, helps us track weather patterns on the mountain. I'd worked with her for years, trusted her judgment completely. She took one look at Marcus and started pulling out instruments. Thermometers, wind gauges, humidity sensors. For 20 minutes, she took readings, frowning deeper with each measurement. "This is impossible," she finally said. "The temperature gradient makes no sense. It's like there's a pocket of Arctic air sitting right here, but my instruments say that can't exist." We moved Marcus's body down to the medical examiner, but the mystery followed us. Even in the heated ambulance, frost kept forming on his clothes and gear. The EMTs had to turn the heat up full blast just to keep the windows from fogging over. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about the look on Marcus's face. He didn't look surprised or scared. He looked almost peaceful, like he'd been expecting what happened to him. I got up around midnight and walked out onto my deck. The mountain was quiet except for the usual night sounds: owls, wind in the trees, distant sound of water running over rocks. Then I heard something else. Faint, almost lost in the wind, but definitely there. Someone calling for help. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, threw on my jacket, and headed toward the sound. It seemed to be coming from up near Rough Ridge, same area where we'd found Marcus. The voice was clearer now as I climbed. A man's voice, desperate and scared. "Help me! Please! Somebody help me!" But something felt wrong about it. The voice carried too well in the thin air, and it never seemed to get closer no matter how fast I climbed. After 20 years of mountain rescue, you learn how sound travels in the peaks. This didn't follow the rules. When I reached Rough Ridge, the calling stopped. My flashlight beam swept across the rocks where Marcus had died. Nothing there except some scuff marks where we'd moved the body. I keyed my radio. "Base camp, this is Stormcrow. You getting any distress calls tonight?" "Negative, Bobby. All quiet down here. Everything okay up there?" I was about to respond when I heard the voice again. Closer this time, coming from the rocks to my left. "Bobby? Bobby, is that you?" The flashlight slipped from my hands. I knew that voice. It was Sarah. My wife had been dead for 8 years, but I heard her clear as day calling my name. Same voice that used to wake me up on Sunday mornings. Same laugh that made me fall in love with her 15 years ago. "Sarah?" I whispered. The wind picked up, and for a moment I could swear I smelled her perfume, that vanilla scent she always wore. The temperature dropped fast enough that I could see my breath. "Bobby, I'm so cold. Why didn't you come with me that day?" My hands were shaking as I picked up the flashlight. The beam wavered across the rocks, but nothing was there, just stone and shadow and the growing cold. "You could have saved me, Bobby. You chose work instead." The voice was moving now, circling around me like the wind. And with it came the cold, not just cool mountain air, but the kind of deep freeze that gets into your bones and stays there. I ran. 40-year-old park ranger with 16 years of experience, and I ran down that mountain like a scared kid. Didn't stop until I reached my cabin, didn't feel safe until I had all the lights on and the wood stove burning hot. But even inside, with the fire going strong, I could still hear Sarah's voice carried on the wind. "Why didn't you save me, Bobby?" I didn't sleep that night, just sat by. The fire, listening to the wind and trying to convince myself I'd imagined everything. Altitude sickness, maybe. Stress from finding Marcus's body. Grief playing tricks on my mind after 8 years. When morning came, I felt better. Daylight has a way of making night fears seem silly. I made coffee, checked my weather instruments, called in my daily report to base camp. Normal ranger routine. Then Jim Martinez radioed with news that made my coffee go cold. "Bobby, we got another one. Same situation as yesterday." This time it was a woman named Lisa Park, 35, from Winston-Salem. Experienced hiker, good gear, found frozen solid at Callaway Peak about 2 miles from Rough Ridge. Same impossible circumstances, 70-degree weather, but she was covered in ice. I met the recovery team at Callaway Peak. Lisa was sitting under a pine tree, hands folded in her lap, looking almost peaceful. Frost covered her jacket and backpack. The ground around her was white with ice crystals. But here's what really scared me. Her water bottle was sitting next to her, still liquid. The freezing zone was even smaller this time, maybe 4 feet across, just enough to cover Lisa and nothing else. Dr. Creek was there again, looking more confused than before. 2 localized freeze events in 2 days, she said. In September, in North Carolina. This doesn't happen, Bobby. I told her about hearing the voices the night before, though I left out the part about Sarah. Creek listened without interrupting, taking notes in her weather log. Sound carries strangely in mountain air, she said when I finished, but voices calling for help. She shook her head. Maybe other hikers got spooked by what happened to Marcus, called out and left when no one answered. It sounded reasonable in daylight, but I kept thinking about how Sarah's voice had moved around me like the wind itself was talking. We brought Lisa's body down, and that evening I decided to do something that probably wasn't smart. I was going back up to Rough Ridge after dark. If something was happening up there, needed to know what it was. This time I came prepared. Full cold weather gear, extra flashlights, emergency beacon, and a digital thermometer that could log temperature changes. If there really were pockets of Arctic air appearing on the mountain, I was going to document them. I reached Rough Ridge around 10 p.m. The night was clear and warm, stars bright overhead. I set up my equipment near where we'd found Marcus, then settled in to wait. For 2 hours, nothing happened, just normal mountain sounds and a gentle breeze. My thermometer held steady at 64 degrees. Then around midnight, the temperature started dropping. Not gradually like it should when night deepens, but fast. My thermometer went from 64 to 50 in less than a minute, then 40, then 30. My breath started misting and frost began forming on the rocks around me. That's when I heard the voices. Not just Sarah this time. Multiple voices calling from different directions. "Help us, Bobby. So cold up here. Why didn't you come in time?" I recognized some of them. Voices of people I'd tried to save over the years. People who died while I was rushing to reach them. People whose names were carved on the memorial plaque down at base camp. The cold was getting worse. My fingers were going numb despite my gloves. Ice was forming on my jacket zipper. The thermometer read 18 degrees and still dropping. But the voices were getting clearer, closer, and they were all saying the same thing now. "Come with us, Bobby. Stop carrying the guilt. It's so peaceful here." That's when I saw it. A shape moving through the trees, tall and thin and wrong. At first I thought it was just shadows playing tricks, but as it got closer I could see it more clearly. It looked like a person, but stretched too tall and too thin. Ice hung from its arms like frozen skin. Where its eyes should have been, it were just empty holes that seemed to glow with cold light. When it spoke, its voice was the wind itself. "You let them all die, Bobby. Marcus, Lisa, Sarah, all the ones you were too slow to save." The thing raised one arm, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Ice started forming on my eyelashes. Join them. End the guilt. End the pain. For a moment I almost did it. The cold was numbing more than just my body. It was numbing the ache I'd carried for 8 years. The voice promised peace, an end to all the what-ifs and should-haves that haunted my dreams. But then I remembered something Sarah used to say. "You can't save everyone, Bobby, but you can't give up trying to save anyone." I fumbled for my emergency beacon with numb fingers and triggered the distress signal. The bright red light cut through the darkness, and the thing in the trees let out a sound like wind through broken glass. It was backing away from the light, the glow in its eye sockets dimming. The temperature started climbing back toward normal. "This isn't over," it said, voice fading with the wind. "The mountain remembers every death, every failure. I'll be waiting." The rescue helicopter found me 20 minutes later, nearly unconscious from hypothermia despite the warm night air. They flew me down to the hospital in Banner Elk, where doctors spent 3 hours warming me back up. Official reports said I'd fallen into a sinkhole filled with cold air. Freak geological event. Nothing supernatural about it. But I knew better, and I knew it would be back. They kept me in the hospital for 2 days, running tests and asking questions I couldn't really answer. How do you tell a doctor that something made of ice and wind tried to freeze you to death? How do you explain that the voices of dead people were calling your name? Dr. Creek visited on my second day. She brought charts and weather data, looking more worried than I'd ever seen her. "Bobby, we've had 5 more incidents since you were found," she said, spreading papers across my hospital bed. "All the same pattern. Hikers found frozen in impossible conditions." The names hit me like punches. David Kim, experienced climber. Patricia Wells, mountain guide. Tom Bradley, search and rescue volunteer I'd worked with for years. Elena Rodriguez, college student on a geology field trip. Mike Stevens, photographer who'd been documenting the mountain for National Geographic. All found in different locations across Grandfather Mountain. All frozen solid in warm weather. All wearing expressions of peaceful acceptance. The Park Service is talking about closing the mountain, Creek continued. They can't explain what's happening, and people are scared. I looked at her charts. The freeze zones were getting bigger. Marcus and Lisa had been frozen in areas maybe 6 feet across. The recent victims were found in circles 20 feet wide, with ice covering trees and rocks in perfect rings. It's spreading, I said. Creek nodded. And getting stronger. Whatever's causing this, it's not natural. I've been researching similar events, and the only references I can find are in old Cherokee legends. That's how I met Joseph Bearcloud. Creek brought him to see me that afternoon. He was an elderly Cherokee man, maybe 70, with silver hair and hands weathered from decades of outdoor work. His grandfather had been a traditional medicine man, and Joseph still remembered the old stories. Your mountain has always been sacred to our people, he told me, settling into the chair beside my bed. We called it the place where winter lives. Even in summer, there were spots where the cold never left. He explained about the Wendigo, creatures from the far north that fed on human despair and guilt. But this wasn't exactly that, he said. This was something older, something that had learned to use the mountain's natural cold as a weapon. In the old days, we had ceremonies to keep it sleeping, Joseph said, offerings of fire and light. But those ways were forgotten when the white man came. The spirit has been growing stronger, feeding on the guilt and regret of people who climb the mountain. People like me, I said. Joseph nodded sadly. It calls to those who carry the heaviest burdens, offers them peace through joining the cold, but each person who accepts makes it stronger. How do I stop it? You don't, he said. You survive it. Face what you're running from, and maybe it loses power over you. Easy to say. Harder to do when you're haunted by every person you couldn't save. I was released from the hospital that evening with strict orders to stay off the mountain. But orders don't mean much when people are dying. Tom Bradley had been a good friend. We'd worked dozens of rescues together. Elena Rodriguez was just 22, her whole life ahead of her. I couldn't sit in my cabin while that thing picked off more victims. So I started planning. If the creature fed on guilt and despair, then it would keep targeting people like me. Rescue workers, guides, anyone who blamed themselves for others' deaths. I could use that. Draw it away from innocent hikers and face it myself. But I wouldn't go unprepared this time. I spent 3 days gathering supplies. Emergency flares, portable heaters, anything that could generate heat and light. Joseph Bearcloud visited again, bringing traditional sage and tobacco, explaining how his people had used fire ceremonies to ward off evil spirits. The creature is part of the mountain now, he warned. It knows every trail, every hiding place. You can't outrun it or outclimb it. Your only chance is to face it where it's strongest and prove you're stronger. Dr. Creek tried to talk me out of it when she found out what I was planning. Bobby, this is suicide. You barely survived the first encounter. People are dying because of me, I told her. It's feeding on my guilt, getting stronger because I can't let go of the people I've lost. Maybe if I face it directly, it'll stop hunting others. She wasn't convinced, but she agreed to monitor our radio frequencies and call for help if she didn't hear from me by dawn. I headed up the mountain on October 15th, just as the sun was setting. The creature had been most active at night, and I wanted to meet it on its own terms. I carried minimal gear, just my radio, emergency beacon, flares, and a photograph of Sarah I'd kept in my wallet for 8 years. The mountain felt different as I climbed, quieter than usual, like the normal sounds of night wildlife were being muffled. The temperature was dropping faster than it should, and I could see my breath by the time I reached 4,500 feet. I set up at Rough Ridge, same place where everything started, built a small fire with dry wood and waited. It didn't take long. The voices started around 9 p.m., carried on a wind that felt like ice water against my skin. Bobby, why did you let us die? You were supposed to save us. Join us in the cold. No more guilt. No more pain. The fire started guttering despite the lack of wind, flames turning blue and low. Frost formed on my jacket and gloves. My thermometer showed the temperature dropping towards 0. Then I saw them. Not just the creature this time, but the people it had claimed. Marcus and Lisa, Tom and Elena, all the others. They stood at the edge of the firelight, ice covering their clothes and hair, eyes glowing with that same cold light. Behind them, tall and terrible, stood the thing that controlled them. It had grown since our last encounter, fed by the deaths of 7 people. Ice hung from its skeletal frame like armor, and when it moved, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. "You came back," it said, voice like wind through winter branches. "Good. It's time to stop running from what you are." "What am I?" I asked, teeth chattering. "A failure. A man who lets others die while he lives. How many people have died because you were too slow, too weak, too sick? Cared?" Images flashed through my mind. All the rescues that went wrong, all the times I arrived too late. Sarah falling while I was called away on an emergency. Marcus frozen because I didn't recognize the signs fast enough. Tom dying while I was safe in a hospital bed. "Join us," the creature continued. "Let the cold take away the pain. No more guilt, no more sleepless nights. Just peace." The offer was tempting. The cold was already numbing the ache I'd carried for years, but something Sarah used to say echoed in my memory. "You can't save everyone, Bobby, but you can't give up trying to save anyone." I pulled out one of my emergency flares and triggered it. Brilliant red light blazed across the ridge, and the creatures hissed like steam escaping from a boiler. They stepped back from the light, but didn't flee. "Light won't save you forever," the creature said, "and you only have so many flares." It was right. I had maybe 6 flares total, and each one only burned for a few minutes. But Joseph Bear Cloud had taught me something about dealing with spirits that fed on guilt. "You're wrong about me," I said, lighting another flare as the first one started to fade. "I'm not a failure. I've saved 312 people in 16 years. Yeah, I lost some. Yeah, I couldn't save Sarah or Tom or the others, but I never stopped trying." The creature laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "Pretty words, but you still blame yourself for every death. You still carry their guilt like stones in your heart." "Yeah, I do," I admitted. "But guilt isn't the same as giving up." I pulled out the photograph of Sarah and held it toward the firelight. I loved my wife. I wish I could have saved her, but she wouldn't have wanted me to die because of that guilt. She'd have wanted me to keep saving others. The creature was moving closer despite the flare light, ice forming with each step. Touching. But guilt is guilt, and guilt feeds me. "Then starve," I said, and threw Sarah's photograph into the fire. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. That picture was all I had left of her, the last tangible connection to our life together. But keeping it was keeping her trapped in my guilt. As the photograph burned, something changed. The creature stopped advancing, its glowing eyes flickering. The temperature stopped dropping. "No," it hissed. "You need the guilt. Without it, you're nothing." "Without it, I'm free," I said. "Free to honor the dead by helping the living." I lit another flare and started walking toward the creature. It backed away, the ice on its body beginning to crack. "This isn't over," it snarled. "The mountain remembers. The cold endures." "Maybe," I said, "but so do I." The creature let out one final shriek and dissolved into mist and ice crystals, taking its frozen victims with it. The temperature started climbing back toward normal, and the oppressive silence lifted from the mountain. I radioed Dr. Creek to let her know I was okay, then sat by my dying fire until dawn. For the first time in 8 years, I felt something like peace. But peace doesn't last long in the mountains. 3 weeks passed without any new freeze victims, and I started to think maybe the creature was gone for good. The Park Service reopened the mountain to climbers. Life got back to normal. Then the children started disappearing. Not frozen like the adults, just gone. Vanished from campsites and trailheads without a trace. No bodies found, no signs of struggle. just empty sleeping bags and worried parents calling for search teams. That's when I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. The creature hadn't been destroyed. It had been weakened, forced to change tactics. Instead of feeding on guilt and despair, it was building a new army, taking the innocent to use as weapons against the guilty. The first missing child was Tommy Chen, 8 years old. His family was camping at Bass Lake when he disappeared from their tent sometime during the night. His parents woke up to find his sleeping bag empty and the tent unzipped from the inside. 2 days later, Lisa Martinez vanished from a Girl Scout camping trip. Then Billy Hawkins, age 7, disappeared while hiking with his father on the Tanahua Trail. Within a week, 6 children were missing from Grandfather Mountain, all between ages 6 and 10, all taken without witnesses or evidence. I knew where they were. The creature had them somewhere in the high peaks, probably keeping them alive as bait. It wanted me to come looking, wanted to use my protective instincts against me. This time, I wasn't going alone. Joseph Bearcloud agreed to help despite his age. "This is my responsibility too," he said. "My people should have maintained the old ceremonies. We let the spirit grow too strong." Dr. Creek also volunteered, bringing weather monitoring equipment and emergency communication gear. "Those children are innocent," she said. "Whatever that thing is, it doesn't get to use kids as weapons." We planned our approach carefully. The creature would be expecting me to come charging up the mountain like a desperate rescue worker. Instead, we'd use the old Cherokee knowledge Joseph possessed, combined with modern technology Creek could provide. "The spirit is tied to the cold places," Joseph explained as we prepared. "Caves and crevices where winter never leaves. There's an old ice cave system near the summit, places my people avoided even in the warmest weather." Creek had been monitoring temperature anomalies across the mountain for weeks. "There's definitely something creating localized cold spots near the peak," she confirmed. "Areas where the temperature stays below freezing even in direct sunlight." We started our climb on November 1st, when the first snow was already dusting the higher elevations. The creature would be strongest now in its natural season, but that also meant we could track it more easily. The trail was harder than I expected. Ice covered the rocks even where there shouldn't be any, and the wind carried voices, children's voices, calling for help. "Mr. Bobby, help us. We're so cold. Please come find us." It was nearly unbearable. Every instinct I had screamed to run toward those voices to rescue the kids before it was too late. But Joseph kept me focused. "The creature knows you," he said. "It's using your nature against you. Stay calm. We find them together, or we don't find them at all." As we climbed higher, the voices got stronger, and the cold got worse. By the time we reached 5,500 feet, we were walking through a landscape of ice and snow that shouldn't exist in November in North Carolina. That's when Creek's equipment started going crazy. "Temperature readings are impossible," she said, checking her instruments. -20 in some spots, 70 degrees just 10 feet away. It's like reality is breaking down up here. We found the ice cave system around 3 p.m., hidden behind a screen of frozen trees. The entrance was maybe 4 feet wide, leading down into darkness that seemed to glow with cold light. And from deep inside, we could hear the children crying. "It's a trap," I said. "Has to be." Joseph nodded. "Of course. But those children are real, and they're dying. The spirit needs living victims to complete its transformation." Transformation into what? Something that doesn't need winter to survive. Something that can hunt in any season, anywhere. We had to go in. But first, we set up emergency protocols. Creek would monitor from outside, ready to call for helicopter rescue if we didn't emerge in 2 hours. She had flares and heaters to mark our exit route. Joseph and I descended into the ice cave with portable lights and emergency heat sources. The temperature dropped 20 degrees within the first 50 feet. Our breath misted immediately, and ice began forming on our equipment. The cave system was larger than expected, with multiple passages branching off in different directions. But following the children's voices led us deeper and down, into chambers carved from solid ice. We found them in a circular cavern maybe 100 feet underground. 6 children, ages 6 to 10, sitting in a circle around a pool of frozen water. They were blue with cold but still alive, calling for help with voices that echoed strangely in the ice-covered walls. But something was wrong with their eyes. Instead of brown or blue or green, they glowed with the same cold light I'd seen in the creature's victims. "It's too late," came a familiar voice from the shadows. "They're already mine." The creature emerged from the ice walls themselves, larger and more solid than before. Feeding on the children's life force had made it stronger, more real. Ice armor covered its skeletal frame, and its glowing eyes were brighter than ever. "You brought friends," it said, looking at Joseph. "How thoughtful. I haven't tasted Cherokee blood in generations." Joseph stepped forward, pulling out a bundle of sage and tobacco. "I offer you fire and smoke, old spirit. Release the children and return to your slumber." The creature laughed. "The old ways are dead, Red Man. Your people forgot the ceremonies. Your power is gone." "Maybe," Joseph said, "but Bobby's isn't." I realized what he meant. The creature had been feeding on my guilt, growing stronger from my failures. But I'd let go of that guilt when I burned Sarah's photograph. Now I had something else. Not the desperate fear of failure, but the calm determination of someone who'd faced his demons and survived. "You made a mistake," I told the creature. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." I lit one of my emergency flares, and the red light filled the cavern. The creature hissed and stepped back, but it didn't retreat like before. "Light won't save you this time," it snarled. "I'm too strong now, too real." It was right. The flare light was barely affecting it, but that wasn't my real plan. While the creature focused on me, Joseph had been working his way around the cavern. Now he was directly behind the children, sage bundle burning, speaking words in Cherokee that seemed to make the ice walls vibrate. "What are you doing?" the creature demanded, turning toward him. That's when I made my move, not toward the creature, but toward the pool of frozen water in the center of the cavern. Joseph had explained that spirits like this were often tied to specific locations, pools, caves, particular rocks or trees. I pulled out my last flare and cracked it open, pouring the chemical mixture directly into the ice. The effect was immediate and devastating. The frozen pool began to glow with red light, and cracks appeared in the ice covering the cavern walls. The creature let out a shriek that made my ears ring. "No, that is my heart, my anchor to this place." The children suddenly blinked, their eyes returning to normal colors. They looked around in confusion, as if waking from a dream. "Run!" I shouted to them. "Follow the lights back to the surface." Joseph was already leading them toward the cave entrance, his sage bundle providing a trail of smoke to follow. The creature tried to stop them, but the light from the burning pool was weakening it, making it translucent. "This ends now," I told it, pulling out the last of my flares. "If I die, I take you with me," the creature snarled, lunging forward with claws of ice. The cold hit me like a physical blow, but I'd been expecting it. Instead of fighting the freeze, I let it numb the pain as I triggered every remaining flare at once. The cavern filled with brilliant red light. The creature's scream shattered ice throughout the cave system. Chunks of frozen ceiling began falling as the supernatural cold that held everything together finally broke. I felt the creature's claws rake across my chest, felt the killing cold trying to stop my heart. But I also felt something else, the warmth of knowing I'd saved those 6 children, and the satisfaction of finally beating the thing that had haunted my mountain. The creature dissolved into mist and ice crystals one final time, but this time it didn't reform. The light from the burning pool consumed it completely, along with the supernatural cold that had kept the cave system frozen. As normal temperatures returned, the ice cavern began to collapse. I ran for the entrance as chunks of stone and ice crashed down around me, following the trail of smoke Joseph had left behind. I made it out just as the cave system imploded, sealing the creature's resting place forever. The children were safe, wrapped in emergency blankets and crying for their parents. Joseph was treating them for hypothermia, but they'd all survive. "Is it over?" Dr. Creek asked as we waited for the rescue helicopters. I looked back at the collapsed cave entrance, now just a pile of broken rock. "Yeah," I said. "It's over." The official report blamed the missing children on a complex cave system and unusual weather conditions. The media called it a miracle rescue. The Park Service gave me a commendation for heroism. But the real story, the truth about what lived in the ice caves of Grandfather Mountain that stayed buried with the creature. The children recovered completely, though a few reported strange dreams about being cold and hearing voices in the wind. Tommy Chen's parents sent me a Christmas card every year after that. Lisa Martinez grew up to become a park ranger herself, working in the Smokies. Joseph Bearcloud died peacefully 3 years later, but not before teaching me some of the old Cherokee ceremonies for keeping mountain spirits at rest. I perform them every winter solstice now, just to be safe. Dr. Creek transferred to a weather station in Colorado, saying she needed a change of scenery. We keep in touch through Christmas cards and the occasional email. She never published her research on the temperature anomalies at Grandfather Mountain. As for me, I kept working as a park ranger for 12 more years, until my knees got too bad for the high altitude rescues. I retired in 1997 with 487 successful rescues under my belt. Not bad for someone who used to think he was a failure. I still live near the mountain, in a cabin just outside the national forest. Sometimes hikers stop by to ask about trail conditions or weather forecasts. I help when I can, share what I know about staying safe in the peaks. But I never tell them about the ice caves or the creature that used to live there. Some stories are better left buried. The mountain is peaceful now. Normal cold in winter, normal warm in summer. Wildlife has returned to the high peaks. I've seen bear tracks where ice used to form in July. The Cherokees say the mountain sleeps again, the way it should. Still, on winter nights when the wind is howling through the peaks, I sometimes think I hear voices calling. Not the desperate cries of the creature's victims, but something else. Warnings, maybe. Or just the mountain itself remembering. I keep emergency flares in my truck, even in retirement, just in case. Because I learned something up there in those ice caves, something worth remembering. The mountains are old, older than human guilt or regret or fear. They've seen civilizations rise and fall, watched countless people struggle with their demons on the rocky slopes and wind-swept peaks. Most of the time, the mountains are just mountains. Stone and soil and growing things, weather patterns and geological forces. But sometimes, in the deep places where winter never fully leaves, old hungers can take root. Fed by human despair, they grow into something more than natural. The creature I faced wasn't evil in any human sense. It was hungry. Hungry for the warmth that guilt and regret steal from the living. It offered peace through surrender, an end to suffering through joining the cold. But real peace doesn't come from giving up. It comes from accepting that you can't save everyone, but still trying to save who you can. From carrying your losses without letting them crush you. From finding the strength to light one more flare when the darkness closes in. I think about that sometimes when young rangers ask me for advice about the job. How do you handle the ones you lose, they want to know. How do you keep going when you fail? I tell them what Sarah used to tell me. You can't save everyone, but you can't give up trying to save anyone. The mountain taught me that lesson the hard way. But it was a lesson worth learning. And if you ever find yourself hiking in the North Carolina mountains, if you hear voices calling for help on a warm night when frost shouldn't form, remember what I learned up there in the ice caves. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is answer, but sometimes you have to answer anyway. That's what it means to be human in a world where old hungers never truly die. You face the cold, you light your flares, and you save who you can. The rest, you leave to the mountain. My name is Margaret Bloodmoon, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a park ranger in the George Washington National Forest for 12 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Virginia mountains could throw at me. Bears that got too comfortable around campers, drunk hunters who couldn't tell a deer from a cow, and enough missing hikers to fill a small-town cemetery. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened during the October hunting season of 1991. I worked the Shenandoah Valley sector, way out near the West Virginia border where the trees grow thick and the roads turn to dirt paths that most folks are too smart to follow. It's beautiful country, don't get me wrong. Rolling hills covered in oak and maple, streams that run crystal clear, and enough wildlife to make any nature lover's heart sing. But it's also the kind of place where you can disappear without a trace, where cell phones don't work, and where the nearest help is 12 miles of winding mountain road away. My specialty is hunting season coordination and predator management. Sounds fancy, but really it means I make sure hunters follow the rules and deal with any animals that cause trouble. In 12 years, I've put down rabid raccoons, relocated problem bears, and tracked down more than my share of wounded deer. I know these woods like the back of my hand, and I know the difference between a natural death and something that ain't right. At 34, I'm tougher than most men who work these mountains, and I've had to be. Single mother, raising a daughter, though she lives with my parents down in the valley where she can go to a decent school. It gets lonely up here sometimes, but I love the work. There's something honest about it, something real. At least that's what I used to think. The old-timers around here have always told stories about the full moon. Going back to the 180 heroes, they say, when the moonshine runners and family feuds were at their worst. They called it moon madness, times when normal folks would do crazy things, when the woods would go quiet, when even the bravest hunters would refuse to go out after dark. I always figured it was just folklore, old mountain superstition mixed with too much white lightning. But that October, something changed. The hunting season started normal enough. Crisp autumn nights, leaves turning gold and red, and that familiar sound of rifle shots echoing through the valleys. I was busy with the usual stuff, checking licenses, making sure people weren't hunting too close to houses, keeping track of the harvest numbers. Everything routine. Then came the reports of strange howls during the full moon. Not coyotes or dogs, but something deeper, more organized. Hunters started talking about tracks they'd never seen before, too big for wolves, which we don't even have in these parts, but shaped wrong for bears. Most of them figured it was just excitement talking, city folks who didn't know the difference between a large dog print and something wild. I should have paid more attention to those reports, should have trusted the unease that started growing in my gut every time I heard another hunter mention those howls. But I was practical, scientific. I had explanations for everything. Rabid animals, overactive imaginations, maybe some hybrid dogs gone feral. Werewolf stories were just that, stories. The first sign that something was really wrong came on October 15th, 3 days before the full moon. I was checking the deer harvest station near Bear Creek when Earl Hutchins drove up in his rusted-out pickup truck. Earl's been hunting these mountains longer than I've been alive, and he's about as steady as they come. But that morning, his hands were shaking as he lit his cigarette. "Maggie," he said, not muted. In my eyes, something's got the animals spooked. Been tracking a 6-point buck for 2 days, and every critter in the woods has just left. Ain't natural. Even the squirrels are gone. Told him it was probably just hunting pressure. Too many people in the woods. But Earl shook his head, took a long drag from his smoke, and said something that stuck with me. In 40 years of hunting, I ain't never seen the woods this quiet. It's like they all know something's coming. That night, alone in my ranger station, I found myself checking the locks on the doors, which was stupid, because in 12 years I'd never once worried about security. What was I going to lock out? A confused bear? But Earl's words had gotten under my skin, and as the moon grew fuller and brighter outside my windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching from the tree line. 3 days later, everything changed. October 18th started like any other day during hunting season. I woke up early, made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and headed out to check on the hunting parties scattered across my sector. The full moon was rising that night, and I wanted to make sure everyone was settled and following regulations before the weekend crowd arrived. My first stop was the Bradshaw party. 3 guys from Richmond who came up every year for the camaraderie more than the actual hunting. They'd set up camp near the old Morrison homestead, about 6 miles into the forest on a trail that used to service the moonshine operations back in Prohibition days. Good spot, plenty of deer sign, and far enough from other camps to avoid any accidents. But when I pulled up to their campsite that morning, something was wrong. The silence hit me first. No talking, no crackling campfire, no sound at all except my truck engine ticking as it cooled. Their tents were still standing, but the flaps were open and moving in the breeze like they were breathing. "Hello?" I called out, hand instinctively moving to the radio on my belt. "Jim? Bobby? You guys around?" No answer. I found them about 50 yards from camp, and the sight is burned into my memory forever. 3 experienced hunters, all with their rifles unfired and still slung across their shoulders. But they were torn apart like they'd met a buzzsaw. The weird thing was, there was no blood trail leading to the bodies, no sign of a struggle. It was like something had killed them instantly, and then arranged them. Jim Bradshaw was the worst. Whatever had gotten him had used some kind of tool. I could see cut marks on the bones that were too clean for claws, too precise for teeth. His hunting knife was missing from its sheath, but I found it later, buried point first in a tree trunk 8 feet off the ground. No way a bear or mountain lion could have done that. I called it in on my radio, but the reception was bad, just static and broken words. I'd have to drive back to the main road to get a clear signal. But first, I needed to secure the scene and look for whatever had done this. The tracks around the bodies were like nothing I'd ever seen. Too big for dogs, wrong shape for bears, but they showed clear signs of intelligence. They formed patterns around the campsite, like whatever made them had been studying the men before attacking. And some of the prints showed what looked like opposable thumbs. I'm a wildlife biologist. I know animal behavior, and I know how predators hunt. This wasn't random. This wasn't some rabid animal or territorial dispute. This was planned. As I knelt down to get a better look at one of the clearer prints, I heard it for the first time. A low, rumbling howl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't like any wolf I'd heard on nature documentaries. It was deeper, more controlled, and it had an almost musical quality to it, like a song. Other howls answered from different directions, at least 4, maybe 5, calling back and forth in what sounded like conversation. This season, a hair on the back of my neck stood up as I realized they were surrounding me. I backed toward my truck, hand on my service pistol, eyes scanning the tree line. The howling stopped as due, suddenly as it had started, but I could feel them watching, waiting, testing me. I made it to the truck and got the hell out of there, but as I drove down the mountain road, I kept checking my rearview mirror. Something was following me, staying just out of sight in the trees, keeping pace with my truck even as I pushed it faster than was safe on those winding curves. Back at the ranger station, I finally got through to the county sheriff's office. Detective Ray Morrison said he'd be up within the hour with the coroner and a forensics team. While I waited, I tried to make sense of what I'd seen. 3 experienced hunters, dead without firing a shot. Tool marks on the bones, tracks that showed intelligence and planning, and those howls, coordinated, purposeful, almost like they were talking to each other. I pulled out my reference books on local wildlife, looking for anything that might explain what I'd seen. Black bears could get aggressive, but they didn't use tools. Coyotes sometimes formed packs, but not in these mountains. And those tracks were too big, too human-like. That's when I remembered something my grandmother used to tell me about the old days, back when families like the Hutchins and the Morrisons ran moonshine through these same valleys. She said there were some families that carried a curse, bloodlines that were different, especially during the full moon. I'd always thought it was just superstition, stories made up to keep children from wandering the woods at night. But as I sat there looking at the photos I'd taken of those impossible tracks, with the memory of those intelligent howls still echoing in my ears, I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the old-timers knew something I didn't. When Detective Morrison arrived, he took one look at the scene and called it the work of a deranged person. "Probably some mountain man gone crazy," he said. "We'll sue, et up roadblocks, check the hospitals for anyone with animal bites or scratches." I wanted to agree with him. A human killer made sense, fit into the world I understood. But as we stood there in the afternoon sun, looking at those precise tool marks and impossible tracks, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were dealing with something that was both human and animal at the same time. That night, as the full moon rose over the mountains, the howling started again. But this time it was closer. Much closer. The next morning brought more bad news. 2 separate hunting parties reported being stalked during the night. Not attacked, but definitely followed and watched by something that moved through the forest without making a sound. Tom Wheeler, a local guide who'd been taking city folks hunting for 20 years, came to the ranger station around 8 a.m. looking like he hadn't slept. His client, a lawyer from Norfolk, was packing up and heading home 3 days early. "Whatever's out there, Maggie, it ain't natural," Tom said, accepting the cup of coffee I offered with hands that shook slightly. "We were sitting by the campfire, maybe 10 o'clock, when we started hearing movement in the bushes. Figured it was just a deer or something, so we got quiet and waited." He paused to take a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "That's when we saw the eyes. Yellow, like a dog's, but too high off the ground. Too intelligent. They'd appear for a few seconds, then disappear, then show up somewhere else. Like whatever it was circling us, studying us. My client wanted to take a shot, but I stopped him. You don't shoot at something unless you know what it is, and I had no idea what we were looking at." I asked Tom if he'd heard any howling, and his face went white. Around midnight, they started calling to each other. At least 3 of them, maybe more. But Maggie, I swear to it sounded like they were making plans, like they were talking about us. After Tom left, I spent the morning checking on other camps and hunters in the area. Everyone had stories. Equipment moved during the night. Food stores raided, but only certain items taken, mostly meat and anything with a strong smell. Tracks around campsites that were too clear, too deliberate, like whatever made them wanted to be seen. But the strangest report came from Earl Hutchins. I found him at his usual spot near Devil's Den, a rocky outcrop that overlooks one of the best deer trails in the forest. Earl's family had been hunting these mountains for 4 generations, and he knew every animal track, every bird call, every sign the forest could show. "Maggie," he said when he saw me approaching, "I need to show you something, and I need you to promise me you won't think I'm crazy." He led me to a clearing about 100 yards from his tree stand. In the center of the clearing, arranged in a perfect circle, were the bones of several deer. Not fresh kills, but old bones that had been gathered from all over the forest and placed with obvious care. In the middle of the circle was a pile of hunting equipment, knives, compass, even a rifle scope, all items that had been reported stolen from various camps over the past few days. "Found this yesterday morning," Earl said. "Whatever's doing this can use tools, can plan, can think, and it's collecting our stuff like trophies." I knelt down to examine the arrangement more closely. The bones were placed with obvious intelligence, forming patterns that almost looked like symbols. And the stolen equipment showed signs of careful examination. Scratch marks where something had tested the sharpness of blades, fingerprints on the rifle scope that were too large to be human. "Earl," I said slowly, "have you ever heard your family talk about anything like this before? Any old stories about things that hunt during the full moon?" Earl was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "My grandfather used to tell stories about the Donovan family. Say, they had a curse on them. Went back generations. During full moons, they'd change, become something else. But Granddad also said they were all dead, killed off in the 1940s when people got tired of losing livestock and children." "What if they weren't all killed?" I asked. "What if some survived, went deeper into the mountains?" That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse to research property records and old newspaper archives. What I found chilled me to the bone. The Donovan family had indeed owned large tracts of land in the most remote parts of the forest. And every generation, there were reports of missing people, strange deaths, and sightings of creatures that walked upright but weren't quite human. The last official record was from 1943, when a group of local men had supposedly tracked down and killed the remaining members of the family. But the bodies were never found, and the men who participated in the hunt never talked about what really happened in those deep woods. As the sun set and the full moon began to rise, I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of going home to my isolated cabin, I decided to spend the night at the ranger station, which was built like a small fortress with thick walls and reinforced windows. Around 10 p.m., Detective Morrison called on the radio. "Maggie, we've got another situation. Family of 4 camping near Blackwater Creek. Neighbors reported screaming around 9 o'clock. But by the time we got there, the campsite was destroyed and the family was gone." I asked him what he meant by gone. "I mean gone, Maggie. No bodies, no blood trail, nothing. But there are those same strange tracks everywhere, and something tore their RV apart like it was made of paper. Whatever we're dealing with, it's getting bolder." That's when I heard the first howl of the night, closer than ever before. Within seconds, others answered, red from different directions. They were surrounding the ranger station. I turned off all the lights and grabbed my rifle, a Remington 700 with a night vision scope that I used for emergency wildlife management. Through the scope, I could see them moving through the trees, dark shapes that walked upright but moved with animal grace. They were studying the building, testing windows and doors, looking for weaknesses. As I watched, one of them stepped into a patch of moonlight, and I got my first clear look at what we were dealing with. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur, with a wolf-like head, but human-like hands that ended in curved claws. Its eyes glowed yellow in the moonlight, and when it looked directly at my window, I could see intelligence there. Ancient, wild intelligence that was both animal and terrifyingly human. It raised its head and howled, a sound that seemed to shake the building. The others answered, and I realized they weren't just hunting anymore. They were calling me out. They wanted me to know they were there, wanted me to understand that I was trapped. The siege had begun. The attack started at midnight, just as the full moon reached its peak. They came from all sides at once, a coordinated assault that no normal pack of animals could have planned. The first one hit the back door with enough force to crack the heavy wooden frame. I fired through the door, heard a yelp of pain, then the sound of something large retreating into the woods. But there was no time to celebrate. 2 more were already testing the windows on the east side of the building. Through my night vision scope, I could see at least 5 of them moving with military precision. One would create a distraction at the front, while others probed for weaknesses at the back. They were using tactics, for God's sake. Flanking maneuvers and coordinated strikes that spoke of intelligence far beyond any animal I'd ever encountered. The largest one, the alpha, I figured, stood at the edge of the clearing and seemed to be directing the others. When I aimed at it through the window, it looked directly at me and shook its head slowly, almost like it was disappointed. Then it threw back its head and howled, and I swear I heard something like words in that sound. A name, maybe, or a warning. My radio crackled to life. Detective Morrison's voice came through the static. "Maggie, we're about 15 minutes out with backup. Can you hold on?" "I'll try," I told him. But even as I said it, I heard the sound of breaking glass from the supply room. One of them had found a way in. I grabbed my rifle and extra ammunition, plus something I'd been saving for an emergency. 3 silver bullets that my grandmother had given me years ago. She'd told me they were blessed by a mountain preacher and would stop anything that walked these woods, natural or otherwise. I'd always thought it was just superstition, but I was desperate enough to try anything. The creature in the supply room was bigger than the others, scarred across its muzzle like it had been in many fights. When it saw me, it didn't attack immediately. Instead, it spoke. "Maggie Blood Moon," it said in a voice that was half growl, half human speech. "Your family name calls to ours." I nearly dropped my rifle. "You can talk?" "We remember when we were like you," it said, moving closer but staying just out of rifle range. "Before the curse took us, we remember our human names, our human lives. But the moon calls, and we must answer." "What do you want?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to know the answer. "To hunt, to feed, to add to our pack." Its yellow eyes fixed on mine. "You would make a strong addition, Ranger. Your bloodline has power." That's when I understood. They weren't just killing people. They were trying to turn them. The families that had disappeared, the missing bodies, They'd been taken somewhere to be changed, to become part of the pack. "The Donovan family," I said. "Ed, you're what's left of them." The creature that had once been human nodded slowly. "We are all that remains of many families. The curse spreads, generation to generation, each full. Moon, we remember less of who we were and more of what we must be." Outside, the others were getting bolder. I could hear them on the roof now, testing the strength of the wooden beams. The building shook as something heavy landed on the metal covering of the chimney. "Join us willingly," the scarred one said, "and keep your mind when you change. Fight us, and become nothing but hunger and instinct." I thought about my daughter, living safely with my parents in the valley. I thought about all the hunters and families who would come to these mountains in the years ahead, never knowing what was waiting for them in the deep woods. "I've got a better idea," I said, and put one of those silver bullets through the creature's chest. The effect was immediate and terrible. The thing that had been speaking to me collapsed, its body convulsing as dark fur began to shed and human features started to emerge. For just a moment, I saw the face of a man, maybe 40 years old, with eyes full of pain and gratitude. Then he was still. The howling outside turned to screams of rage. They'd felt their packmate die, and they were coming for me with everything they had. The front door exploded inward, and two of them charged through together. I got one with my second silver bullet, but the other was on me before I could work the bolt action. We went down together, rolling across the floor as it tried to pin me with claws that could have opened me up like a can of sardines. Its breath was hot and foul in my face, and I could see intelligence in its yellow eyes, even as it tried to tear my throat out. Somehow I managed to get my knife free from my belt and drive it up under the creature's ribcage. It wasn't silver, but the blade was sharp, and I put all my strength behind it. The thing rolled off me with a very human scream of pain, clutching at the wound. That's when I heard the sound of Vinnie. Ellie's coming up the mountain road, Detective Morrison and his backup arriving just in time. The remaining creatures heard it too, and their leader let out a long, mournful howl that was answered from deep in the forest. They melted back into the woods as suddenly as they'd appeared, carrying their wounded with them. Within minutes, the ranger station was surrounded by police cars and emergency vehicles, their flashing lights turning the forest into a nightmare landscape of red and blue shadows. But the nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. Detective Morrison found me sitting on the floor of the ranger station, holding my rifle and staring at the body of the creature I'd killed with the silver bullet. In death, it had completely returned to human form, a middle-aged man with graying hair and old scars across his chest and arms. "Jesus Christ, Maggie," Morrison said, kneeling down beside the body. "What the hell happened here?" I told him everything, though I could see the skepticism in his eyes. 3 creatures dead or wounded, coordinated pack attack, supernatural transformation. It sounded crazy even to me, and I'd lived through it. The official report listed the incident as an attack by a pack of rabid wolves with possible human accomplices. The hunting season was suspended for 2 weeks, and the entire sector was temporarily closed to the public. They never found the other bodies, never located the pack's main den, but I knew they were still out there. The coroner's report on the body was classified, but Morrison told me unofficially that the man had been reported missing from a camping trip in 1987. DNA confirmed his identity, but there was no explanation for how he'd survived 4 years in the wilderness or what had caused the extensive physical changes they found in his bone structure and muscle density. I spent the next month studying everything I could find about lycanthropy, family curses, and the old stories of these mountains. What I learned convinced me that the pack I'd encountered was just one of several that roamed the deeper parts of the Appalachians, staying hidden most of the time but hunting during the full moon. The silver bullets had worked, but I'd only had 3. I started carrying more, along with a rifle that could fire them accurately at long range. My grandmother's blessing hadn't been superstition after all. It had been preparation. 2 months later, the hunting season reopened with new regulations. Hunters were required to check in daily by radio, camp only in designated areas, and travel in groups of at least 4. Officially, it was because of increased bear activity. Unofficially, I was trying to make sure no one else would face what I'd faced alone. The nightmares started around Christmas, not just memories of the attack, but dreams where I could hear them calling to me from the deep woods. In these dreams, I would walk out into the forest during the full moon and find them waiting, welcoming me like family. Sometimes I'd wake up standing at my cabin door, hand on the lock, with no memory of getting out of bed. The pull was getting stronger, and I realized that my encounter with them had left me marked somehow, changed. I requested a transfer to a different forest, but my supervisor denied it. "You know these mountains better than anyone," he said. "After what happened, we need experienced people up there." What he didn't understand was that I was becoming one of the things I was supposed to protect people from. Each full moon, the pull got stronger. Each time I fought it off, it got harder. 3 years later, I'm still here, still doing my job, still carrying silver bullets. But I'm also watching the calendar, counting the days until each full moon, feeling the change trying to take hold in my bones and blood. The pack is still out there too. I see their signs sometimes, tracks near remote campsites, livestock kills that show too much intelligence, reports of strange howling that echo through the valleys. They're waiting for something, maybe for me to finally give in and join them. Or maybe they're waiting for the next generation of their family to find its way home. Last week I got a report of a missing hiker near Devil's Den. When I went to investigate, I found tracks that were too familiar, too personal. Among the wolf-like prints was one that looked almost human, but not quite. A child's foot, maybe 10 or 11 years old, with claws instead of toenails. The pack is growing. And somewhere in these mountains, there are families who don't even know what their children might become when the moon grows full and the ancient hunger calls them home. I keep doing my job, protecting the people who come to enjoy these beautiful, dangerous mountains. But every month, when the harvest moon rises over the Shenandoah Valley, I lock my doors, load my rifle with silver bullets, and pray that I'm strong enough to resist the call for one more night. Because the truth is, I'm not just hunting them anymore. They're hunting me too. And sooner or later, one of us is going to win. My name is James Nightshade, but everyone calls me Jimmy. I've been a park ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 15 years now, ever since I came back from the war in the Pacific. Some folks think the name Nightshade sounds spooky, but my grandmother always said it just meant we were good at finding things in the dark. I know these mountains like the back of my hand. Every trail, every rock face, every place where city folks get themselves into trouble. My specialty is the climbing areas, especially around mile marker 10.7, where Raven Rock rises 40 feet straight up from the valley floor. It's a beautiful piece of granite, smooth as glass in some spots, with cracks and ledges that make climbers think they're tougher than they are. In 15 years, I've issued 423 climbing permits for that rock face. I keep detailed records, who's climbing, what equipment they're using, when they expect to be back down. It's saved lives more than once. I've got my standard safety equipment, manila ropes, steel pitons, carabiners, and a first aid kit that's seen plenty of use. I also carry geological survey maps and instruments because I help Dr. Weber from the university when he comes out to study the rock formations. The thing about Raven Rock that always made me laugh was the tourist stories. Singing stones, they called them. Local Cherokee folks had their own stories about the rock, saying it was alive somehow, that spirits lived inside the granite. Vision quest site, they said, sacred ground. I respected their beliefs, but I'm a practical man. 15 years of climbing that rock, and I knew the truth. Sometimes wind whistles through the stone cracks just right, makes musical sounds. Nothing more mysterious than physics. My wife Sarah always teased me about being too practical. "Jimmy," she'd say while packing my lunch, "you wouldn't believe in magic if it bit you on the knob." Our boy Tommy, he was 8 then, loved hearing the Cherokee stories when I brought him to work sometimes. Kids believe in everything. I envied that sometimes, especially after the nightmares started getting bad again. The war changed something in my head. Most nights I slept fine, but when spring storms rolled through the mountains, the thunder would take me right back to Iwo Jima. Sarah understood. She'd wake me gentle-like when I'd start thrashing around, whispering about incoming artillery that wasn't there anymore. April of 1958 was a rough month for storms. The weather couldn't make up its mind. Sunny and warm one day, then cold rain and lightning the next. Made the rock faces slippery and dangerous. I'd already had to turn back 3 climbing parties that week because conditions weren't safe. That's what made Eddie Morrison's permit request so unusual. Eddie was what we called a peak bagger, one of those climbers who collected difficult climbs like trophies. He'd been up Raven Rock 6 times before, always alone, always perfectly prepared. When he showed up that Friday morning asking for a solo permit, I almost said no. Storm clouds were building in the west, and the rock face was still damp from the night before. "Weather's turning, Eddie," I told him, checking my barometer. "Maybe wait until tomorrow?" He just grinned and shouldered his pack. "I've climbed in worse, Jimmy. Besides, I want to test a new route up the north face. Should be down before the rain hits." Eddie knew what he was doing. His equipment was top-notch. New nylon rope, chrome moly pitons, leather climbing shoes with felt soles. He'd been climbing for 12 years, had permits for some of the toughest faces in Virginia. Against my better judgment, I signed his permit for a 2 p.m. return. At 4 p.m., when the first lightning started flashing, Eddie Morrison still wasn't back. I gave Eddie until 4:30, then started up the trail to Raven Rock. Standard rescue protocol. Check the base of the cliff first for signs of a fall, then work my way up the established routes looking for stuck climbers. The storm was getting closer, but lightning wouldn't start hitting the high ground for another hour at least. The forest felt wrong as I hiked up. 15 years in these woods, and I knew every sound they made. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, leaves rustling in predictable ways. But that afternoon, everything was quiet, dead quiet. Even the storm wind seemed muffled, like the mountain was holding its breath. I found Eddie's car parked at the trailhead right where it should be. His climbing log was on the dashboard, neat handwriting marking his intended route up the north face. Everything looked normal until I reached the base of Raven Rock itself. The rock face was humming. Not humming like machinery, humming like a person might hum a tune, low and musical, rising and falling in a pattern that almost sounded like words. I stood there for a full minute, listening, trying to figure out what could make that sound. Wind through the cracks, maybe, but there was barely any breeze. That's when I saw Eddie. He was about 20 feet up the north face, right where the granite forms a natural ledge. But something was terribly wrong. Eddie wasn't hanging from his rope or clinging to handholds. He was embedded in the rock face itself, sunk into the granite up to his chest, like the stone had turned to mud and then hardened again around him. "Eddie," I shouted. "Eddie, can you hear me?" His head turned toward me, slowly, like moving through thick honey. His eyes were open, focused, aware. His mouth moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, impossibly, I heard his voice coming from the rock face around him. "Jimmy," the granite whispered in Eddie's voice. "Jimmy, something's wrong. I can't move. The rock is warm, Jimmy. It's warm, and it's singing." I scrambled up the lower section of the cliff, using handholds I'd climbed 100 times before. But as I got closer to Eddie, my metal equipment started acting strange. The steel pitons in my pack were pulling toward the rock face like magnets. My climbing hammer kept trying to leap out of my hand toward the granite. "Hold on, Eddie," I called. "I'm coming up." When I reached the ledge where Eddie was trapped, I could see that he wasn't hurt. No blood, no broken bones, no signs of trauma. The rock had simply absorbed him. Where his body disappeared into the granite, there was no gap, no crack, no seam. The stone flowed around him like he'd been carved as part of the cliff itself. "How long have you been here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know." Eddie's voice came from all around me now, echoing from the rock face. I was setting a piton, and the granite felt soft. My hand went right into it. Then my arm. I tried to pull back, but it felt so warm, so welcoming. Like coming home, Jimmy. Like finally coming home. I reached out to touch the rock around Eddie's trapped form. The granite was warm, almost body temperature, and it seemed to pulse gently under my palm. Through that touch, images flashed through my mind. The mountain as it was thousands of years ago, covered in ancient forests, home to creatures that no longer had names. And something else, something vast and lonely, sleeping deep in the stone. "The mountain is lonely, Jimmy," Eddie whispered. "So lonely. It just wants company. It doesn't mean to hurt anyone." Thunder cracked overhead, and the first fat raindrops started falling. I had to get help, had to call for the technical rescue team from Charlottesville. But as I started to climb back down, Eddie called out one more time. "Jimmy, wait. It's singing to me. Do you hear it? It's the most beautiful song I've ever heard." I did hear it. The rock face was definitely singing now, a deep, resonant melody that seemed to come from inside the mountain itself. And God help me, it was beautiful. For just a moment I wanted to reach out and touch the warm granite again, to let myself sink into that welcoming embrace. Instead, I climbed down as fast as I could and ran for my radio. The rescue team arrived 2 hours later, 6 men with ropes and pulleys and cutting tools. Dr. Frank Weber came with them, along with Joseph Redwing, a Cherokee medicine man I'd called at Sarah's suggestion. She'd grown up hearing the old stories and thought we might need someone who understood what we were dealing with. "This is impossible," Dr. Weber kept saying, running his hands over the granite around Eddie's trapped form. "Rock doesn't behave this way. Granite is one of the hardest stones on Earth. It doesn't just flow." His geological instruments were going crazy. The magnetic readings showed impossible mineral compositions in the granite. Metals that shouldn't exist, crystals that couldn't form under natural conditions. The temperature readings showed the rock face was nearly 90 degrees, far too warm for stone that should be cooling in the evening air. Joseph Redwing took one look at Eddie and stepped back, shaking his head. "We should not be here," he said quietly. "This is a spirit place. The mountain keeper has been sleeping too long, and now it wakes hungry for companionship." "Can you get him out?" I asked the rescue team leader. "We can try," he said, setting up his equipment. "But I've never seen anything like this. It's like he's been fossilized, but still alive." They tried everything. Ropes and pulleys to pull Eddie free, but he was held fast, and yanking on him just caused him obvious pain. Diamond-tipped saws to cut around him, but the blades wouldn't bite into the granite, sliding off like they were hitting polished steel. Even explosives were discussed, though Eddie himself begged us not to try that. "Please," his voice whispered from the stone. "It doesn't hurt. It's actually comfortable, warm, safe. I can feel the whole mountain, Jimmy. Every root, every straw, every small creature moving through the forest. It's beautiful." That's when the other voices started. At first I thought it was echoes, Eddie's voice bouncing off the cliff face in strange ways. But as I listened more carefully, I realized there were other people talking from inside the rock. Different voices, some speaking English, some in languages I didn't recognize. Men and women, young and old, all of them sounding peaceful and content. "How many?" I whispered to Joseph Redwing. He pressed his ear to the granite and listened for a long time. "Dozens," he said finally. "Maybe more. This has been happening for centuries, I think. People drawn to the rock, welcomed inside, made part of the mountain's dreams." Dr. Weber was frantically taking notes, recording everything with his instruments. "The granite is definitely alive," he announced. "I'm getting electromagnetic readings consistent with neural activity. Brainwaves, essentially. The entire rock face is thinking." As night fell, more climbers started arriving. People who'd heard about Eddie on the radio, curiosity seekers, even some reporters from Roanoke. I tried to keep them back, but the rock face was calling to them too. The singing was getting louder, more complex, like a choir warming up for a performance. "Everyone needs to stay back," I ordered, stretching rope across the trail. "This area is closed until further notice." But 3 people didn't listen. Tom Bradley, an experienced climber from Richmond, ducked under my rope barrier around midnight and started up the rock face. I was checking on Eddie when I heard Tom shout in surprise. By the time I climbed back down to help, Tom was waist deep in the granite, sinking slowly but steadily into the warm stone. It's incredible, Jimmy, Tom called out, his voice already taking on that strange, echoing quality. It's like being welcomed home by an old friend. An hour later, Sarah Mitchell, a college student who'd driven down from D.C., tried to touch the rock face despite all our warnings. Her hand went right into the granite, and she had to be pulled back by 3 men before she disappeared completely. But she fought them, tears streaming down her face. "Let me go," she sobbed. "It's singing to me. Can't you hear it singing just for me?" By dawn, the entire lower section of Raven Rock was off-limits, surrounded by Park Service barriers and stern warnings. But the rock face kept calling to people, its song growing more beautiful and complex with each person it absorbed. Eddie Morrison was now completely invisible, his body fully integrated into the granite, though his voice still whispered from the stone. I'd been awake for 36 hours straight, and my hands were shaking from too much coffee and too much fear. But every time I tried to leave, to go home to Sarah and Tommy, something pulled me back to the rock face. The singing was getting to me too, working its way into my thoughts, making me remember things I'd forgotten. The warmth of my mother's arms when I was small. The feeling of safety in my childhood bed during thunderstorms. The peace I'd felt those few moments in the war when the shelling stopped and everything was quiet and still. The rock promised all of that. Forever. By the 3rd day, I was the only one left at Raven Rock. The rescue team had given up and gone home. Dr. Weber had returned to his university with boxes of impossible data. Even Joseph Redwing had left, saying there was nothing more he could do. The Mountain Keeper was fully awake now, and it would not sleep again until it was satisfied. The only people who remained were the ones trapped in the granite, 11 souls now, their voices creating a harmony that was almost too beautiful to bear. They tried to convince me to join them, speaking of warmth and safety and eternal peace. Eddie Morrison's voice was the strongest, the most persuasive. "Jimmy, you understand loneliness," he whispered as I sat on the ledge beside, where his face had been. "The war left scars on your soul, the nightmares, the sudden panic when thunder rolls across the mountains. Wouldn't it be nice to never feel afraid again?" I pressed my palm against the warm granite, and immediately the mountain's memories flooded through me. Thousands of years of solitude, watching seasons change, feeling the tiny vibrations of animals and humans, moving across its surface but never truly connecting with them. The entity in the rock wasn't evil. It was just desperately, cosmically lonely. "I can take away the pain," the mountain promised in a voice made of stone and wind. "All the memories of war, all the fear, all the loneliness of being human. You can be part of something vast and eternal, Jimmy. Part of me." The granite beneath my hand grew softer, warmer, more welcoming. My fingers began to sink into the stone, and it felt wonderful, like slipping into a warm bath after days in the cold. For a moment, I almost let it happen. The promise of peace was so tempting, especially when thunder started rolling across the valley again, bringing back flashes of artillery fire and screaming men. But then I thought of Sarah, waiting at home with dinner getting cold. Tommy, who needed his father to teach him about the mountains and the proper way to respect them. The 412 other climbing permits I'd issued safely over the years, all the people who'd trusted me to bring them home. I yanked my hand back from the granite, feeling the stone try to hold on to me like quicksand. The mountain's disappointment washed over me in waves, but underneath that disappointment was something else, a grudging respect. "You are strong," the entity admitted. "Stronger than most, but you will return, Jimmy Nightshade. The loneliness will bring you back eventually. They always come back." I pulled out my climbing knife, good steel with an iron guard that my grandfather had made. Iron repels earth spirits, according to the old stories. And as soon as the blade came free of its sheath, the rock face recoiled slightly. The singing faltered, became discordant. "Here's what we're going to do," I said, pressing the iron blade against the granite. "You're going to let these people go. All of them. And in return, I promise to visit you regularly, not to join you, but to keep you company, to talk, to listen to your songs, to help you not feel so alone." The mountain considered this offer for a long time. I could feel its ancient mind weighing options, examining my soul to see if I meant what I said. Finally, the rock face began to shift and flow like thick liquid. One by one, the trapped climbers emerged from the granite. Eddie Morrison first, then Tom Bradley, then Sarah Mitchell and the others. They were alive, unharmed, but changed. Their eyes held depths they hadn't possessed before, as if they'd seen things no human was meant to see. "The deal is struck," the mountain rumbled, its voice now coming from deep underground. "Visit me, Jimmy Nightshade. Share your loneliness with mine, and I will trouble your climbers no more." As the last person emerged from the rock face, the granite solidified again, returning to normal stone. But I could still feel the entity's presence, patient and watchful, waiting for me to keep my promise. The official report listed the incident as a geological anomaly, unusual mineral formations that temporarily destabilized the rock face, making it unsafe for climbing. Raven Rock was permanently closed to the public, marked with signs warning of unstable granite and potential rockfall. Dr. Weber published a paper about impossible magnetic readings that the scientific community politely ignored. The people who'd been trapped in the rock never talked about what they'd experienced, at least not to outsiders. They'd meet sometimes, I heard, gathering quietly to share memories of warmth and belonging that no one else could understand. Eddie Morrison quit climbing entirely and moved to Florida, as far from mountains as he could get. But I'd catch him sometimes, on clear nights, staring north toward Virginia with a look of homesickness in his eyes. I kept my promise to the mountain. Every week, I hike up to Raven Rock and sit on the ledge where Eddie was trapped. I talk to the entity about my life, my work, my family, about the war and the nightmares that still come sometimes when thunder rolls across the valley. The rock listens, its ancient patience helping to ease the loneliness we both carry. The mountain sings for me now, not the hungry, calling song it used to sing, but something gentler. A lullaby, almost. Music that helps me sleep without dreams of artillery fire and screaming men. In return, I bring it stories from the outside world, news of the changing forest, tales of the climbers and hikers who pass safely by its base. Sarah thinks I'm dealing with my war trauma in a healthy way, taking long walks in the mountains to clear my head. Tommy, now 15 and tall enough to hike with me, believes his father has simply found peace in nature. They don't know about the entity sleeping in the granite, and I pray they never will. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, you can still hear music drifting down from Raven Rock. The Cherokee folks nod knowingly when they hear it. They remember the old stories about mountain keepers and the prices of ancient loneliness. The tourists think it's just wind through stone cracks, the way I used to think. I know better now. The mountain still dreams, and sometimes it dreams of the warmth of human companionship. But it's learned patience, learned to find comfort in friendship rather than possession. We keep each other company, the lonely mountain and the scarred ranger, two ancient souls finding peace in the Virginia hills. The rock face remains closed to climbers, but that's probably for the best. Some hungers, once awakened, never fully sleep again, and some friendships are too dangerous for anyone else to understand. Every week, I make that climb. Every week, the mountain sings its gentle songs, and every week I come home to Sarah and Tommy, grateful for the warmth of human love and the solid ground beneath my feet. But I never forget the promise I made in the granite's embrace, that loneliness, whether human or geological, should never have to be faced alone.